Thank you very much. I'd now like to call to order this committee, the whole meeting of March 27th, 2025. And at first, I will put out a call for any declarations of interest. Okay, seeing none, we will proceed. We have business arising from the minutes. However, Councillor Eccles is unable to attend this morning, and it was a notice based on a notice of motion that was raised by him. So we will defer the declaration of Agnes MacPhail Day in Grey County. We did indeed, there were celebrations over the previous weekend, and the actual birthday was March 24th, 2025. So there is an opportunity to work throughout the year towards what we might do in addition next year. So we will defer that until Councillor Eccles can move his notice of motion. Next, we'll move on to the delegations, and we do have one, and he will be participating virtually. And it is with regards to the municipal tax equity consultants. Mr. Fries. Okay. Okay, so I've just been informed that actually we're going to tie that into the report, which I think will make a lot more sense in terms of our discussion. So we'll hold off on hearing that presentation from Mr. Fries until we can hear from Director Spicer as well. That allows us to move on to determination of items requiring separate discussion, item 5. And we have the consent agenda in front of us here. There are 4 different items. So we will, Madam Clerk, do you want me to call out for? Okay, let's call out for the items first before we move the rest of the motion. Any items to pull from the 4? Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden. I'd like to pull 6A, please.
Okay, thank you. 6A has been pulled. Any others? Okay, not seeing any further, so therefore we'll entertain a motion for the consent agenda that the following consent agenda items be received and that staff be authorized to take actions necessary to give effect to the recommendations in the staff reports, and that correspondence be supported or received for information as recommended in the consent agenda. And we have pulled item 6A, but then that includes the remaining items. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Thank you. Moved by Deputy Warden Milne and seconded by Councillor Nielsen. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. So with that, we will proceed to item 7, which is our items for direction and discussion, and we'll return to item 6A at the end of our agenda. The first one that we have is the tax policy. So it is recommended, 7A, it's recommended that FRCW 0525 regarding 2025 property tax policy be received, and that County Council reduce the tax ratio for the multi-residential property tax class from 1.2206000 to 1.110300, which is 1/4 of the movement required to equalize the treatment of all residential classes, and that County Council adopt all other 2025 tax ratios and subclass reductions for the 2025 taxation, and that necessary bylaws be drafted for Council's consideration and approval. May I ask for a mover? Moved by Councillor Dicker. Seconder is Councillor Hutchinson, the original. Okay, so it's now on the floor for discussion. So at this point in time, then welcome Director Spicer. You are there online with us along with Mr. Fries. So Director Spicer, do you want to lead the intro and then bring on Mr. Fries as you see fit?
Thank you. Good morning, Warden Matrosovs and County Council. I'm going to introduce Peter Fries today. He's the Vice President of Policy and Consulting Services for Municipal Tax Equity Consultants. And he's a consultant we've used for many, many years now. So he's well familiar with Grey County as well as other municipalities. Peter will present the 2025 property tax policy that's attached to my report, and then he's going to take any questions. Once that's done, I'll follow up with my report and we'll respond to further questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Good morning, Warden and Council. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? All right, I will proceed. I will go through my presentation as efficiently as possible, but do not hesitate to ask me questions, go back or elaborate on anything. 2021, in terms of what we're talking about, we should be in a position where we were actually wrapping up the last reassessment cycle and starting a new one. So we're still on reassessment hold, and we've actually bypassed an entire 4-year cycle now. So we're still in limbo on reassessment and taxing based on property value estimates set at January 1st, 2016. There are a couple changes. That doesn't mean the rest of the system isn't changing as we move forward. We always have growth and contraction and changes that happen within the year that we have to look at before we consider, before we send out tax bills every year. And then we do have a nuance in terms of provincial policy. We have a new aggregate extraction class for certain properties that used to be in the industrial class. I'll talk about that. And there's also a change. We have a new optional subclass of new multi-residential. That's not really, doesn't have to be part of your 2025 decision-making because it doesn't apply to any current properties. But I'm just going to give you a little overview on that newly introduced optional subclass. So we have a number of influences that alter the amount of tax the county raises and the local area municipalities raise and how it is shared. Reassessment, when it's in effect, redistributes the burden. It doesn't create any more or less property tax, but it changes who pays it. Positive growth does change your revenue. It will add to your tax base capacity. True growth is true addition of taxable assessment. Tax policy, which rests with county council. And when we talk about tax policy, there are administrative policies, but here we're talking about what actually structures the levy, which would be tax ratios, tax class structure, subclass discounts. Again, tax policy doesn't affect how much money you raise. It's where you're raising it from, how the balance of taxation amongst property classes and subclasses lies. We generally talk about tax policy, as I just mentioned, in terms of council's decision, but tax policy changes at the province, like the introduction of this new class, will also affect the distribution of tax, and we'll see how that works in a moment. And then there's levy change, which is tied to your budget. That's where inflationary pressures and spending changes flow through. So we have to consider all of these influences separately, understanding that we don't have any reassessment or phase-in. The first task is to create a baseline. Last year, you passed bylaws, your local area municipalities passed bylaws, you sent out tax bills. As soon as the rolls return for the year, things start to change, mainly with growth. And we have to quantify that and understand what the growth means during 2024 before we can really understand what our decisions in 2025 will mean. So looking back over 2024, we had CVA growth in total of about 2.5%, or 505 million. So this is new assessable property. A nuance here is that we have the aggregate extraction class, which had no assessment. It didn't exist at the beginning of last year. There's $12 million. That's not really new assessment. That is assessment that moved out of the industrial. This entire $12 million was formerly classified for taxation purposes under industrial for 2024. When we look at what that means for revenue, that means that the county and local area municipal levies changed during the year. The overall growth for the county levy went up 2.75%. That's 2.75% growth in real terms on the capacity of your base. It translates to $2 million in county 2024 county levy. Some of that money would have been realized as it appears here, 1 year. Some of it would have gone back further, so the actual what I call cash register dollars would have been different from this. At this point, for our purposes, talking about tax policy, this is a measurement of changed capacity or increased capacity. Were you to raise, you can raise this much more money this year than you started with last year at a 0% levy change position. In a two-tier, it's really important to keep in mind that we share the assessment base with the local area municipalities. When a new home or business comes online, that is county growth. It is also local growth. And again, growth, just, we don't want to get too much into the weeds on reassessment, but this contributes to growth. In reassessment, what we're doing is we're kind of flipping from one time to another and looking at the house in the same condition. That's not growth. This is what we're dealing with now. Just, we're taking perhaps vacant land, we're subdividing it, we're adding improvements, accessible improvements, new taxpayers. And when we look at these numbers, we want to keep in mind, we'll revisit this when we talk about levy change, that this is supplied by new taxpayers or taxpayers that altered or improved their property. Existing taxpayers that left their properties unaltered did not contribute to any of this additional revenue. So we must restate every year. There's always a little, even in the absence of reassessment, we had little nuanced restatements because of the special circumstances around Owen Sound. This year, we have the aggregate extraction class. As I said, that is assessment that was pulled out of industrial. So it didn't really have a tax ratio last year, but those properties were subject to a tax ratio of 1.831 by being part of the industrial class. As the new class, they were subject to a new transition ratio. And a transition ratio is simply our starting ratio for the year. And whenever a new class is established, the province must set those or set a mechanism. The County of Grey's new aggregate extraction class ratio is 18.63% less than those properties were taxed at an industrial. This is a universal reduction. Every municipality's aggregate extraction regulated transition ratio is 18.63% less than their industrial. So this is quite an intentional cut for these properties. To give you a sense of what properties we're talking about, these are gravel pits and quarries. They may have been standalone properties or a portion of property. So some gravel pits, they were an entire roll number. They were IT. Now they are aggregate extraction at a lower tax ratio. Some of them are components of larger properties, or they have some other elements on them. This would capture those gravel pits and quarries. So essentially, this is pulling those out and reducing the tax on them, on those properties. It's a provincial decision. Because we have to start with new ratios, that shifts tax. We looked at your 2024 as revised, which is your year end, including growth. We still rely on that number. However, with the new ratio for 2025 applied against the new roll, we are seeing interclass shifts. These are not dramatic shifts when we consider on, $75, $76 million. We have a shift of $17,000, $18,000 off of those aggregate extraction properties, and they get picked up by the remainder of the base at a rate of 0.02%. So if you're a residential taxpayer, you're going to pick up a shift of 0.02% because of that provincial policy decision. It equates to $9,727 on residential. It's just while we're talking about ratios, before I go on, just a quick reminder again, this isn't something we'll deal with in excruciating detail, but you'll notice the tables do show a subtotal for an Owen Sound requisition. That is because Owen Sound is still has separate ratios. This has been a long-standing special regulated circumstance for them. The ratios have been moving over time. There's a little movement, seems every year. But when that requisition goes across, it's important to know that their share that goes to Owen Sound is calculated in the same way that every other local share. It's calculated using the county's chosen ratios. And then when Owen Sound takes that amount, there is some redistribution. But when the county levies taxes, even in Owen Sound, well, it's under special circumstances. We're counting a residential property at a ratio of 1, a farm property at a ratio of 2.18, a multi-res property at 1.2206. So it's redistributed within Owen Sound, but the Owen Sound requisition is calculated in the exact same way as everything else. We dug into this in more detail last year, but we didn't feel that was necessarily. So there's the Owen Sound wrinkle, and then there's the aggregate extraction. Just to clarify again what this is a distinct class. It is subject to these new ratio limits. And if we want to take a look at sort of what it is overall, what's happened, we had a circumstance last year where taxes were levied, everything was normal. These were all industrial taxes. When partway through the year, the province decided they wanted to provide a break to the gravel pit operators. Municipalities had already set their tax policy and rates. There wasn't much they could do. It would be a little late in the year to do that. So they provided a reduction solely on the education side of the tax bill. Local municipalities had to issue credits to all the properties because they had already been billed. And that countywide was $107,000, almost $108,000 reduction for gravel pits last year, but funded solely by the provincial education portion. Municipalities gave nothing back in 2024. That was a temporary subclass. When they announced it, they said it was temporary. When we get our start tax this year with the new, the new circumstances, then we are actually reducing the municipal portion by $50,000, and the province clawed back their education reduction. So what they really did was they moved a big portion of their education reduction and turned it into a municipal reduction. There's still a slight reduction on the education side, but not like it was last year. And they've put the education back up by $60,000. So, if we compare last year's starting position to this year's starting position, the gravel pits net of education and municipal will pay $50,000 less than last year. Education taxes will be less than last year's starting point, but more than they finally paid. What's the impact of this? It is, for the average residential property in Grey County, it's about 75 cents. So it is an administrative issue. It is sort of it's an odd circumstance where we get these properties pulled out and a forced reduction put through. But in the end, it's not overly material to the taxpayers. So that's kind of what happened, since that's the starting point we're dealing with. We had growth, we had the aggregate extraction. We redistribute a bit based on restating the Owen Sound a big year. Now we come to your decisions, which are municipal tax policy decisions. These rest with county council. Primary to this, and there are all sorts of decisions you can make, but decisions you have to make is what classes you're going to use and what tax ratios you are going to apply. You don't have to make an active decision on classes unless you want to collapse or adopt a new one. But ratios, you have to make that decision every year. What the tax ratios do? Well, they express the relationship in the tax rate between classes. So we have as compared to residential, we have residential at 1. If farm is a quarter of that, or in your case, 218, or we have 118, sorry, and we have higher business class ratios, we're weighting up or down the assessment. We're really saying, hey, for every dollar of assessment for farm, it's worth a bit less. For every dollar of assessment for commercial, it's a bit more. And when we apply those weighting factors, it helps us redistribute the tax. So although, the share of CVA in this really simple illustration, there's 70% on residential and 15 on farm and 15% on business. When we reweight the CVA using ratios, we alter those relationships. Okay. For Grey County, this is how that falls out. We have our current value assessment by class. So res is 70, 4, almost 75. We apply our ratios. We have farm weighted down, we have managed forest weighted down, and pipeline weighted down below 1. Everything else is 1 or above. So it changes our share of tax. So our share of residential, it makes up 74% of the assessment, but carries approximately 83% of the tax to compensate for the weighting down of farm and managed forest primarily. On the opposite side of that, we have industrial, which carries represents 2% of the CVA, but carries 1% of the CVA and carries almost 2% of the tax. So that's the effect of your decisions around ratios. We are moving the tax burden around. We're shifting it. We're adjusting that. That being said, while those are your decisions, you're going to pass a bylaw. Those decisions are made within fairly rigid provincial parameters. These are your 2024 starting ratios that we have already looked at. These are what we call the provincial ranges of flexibility. They used to be called the ranges of fairness. They changed that wording in the regulation recently. I think fairness had a connotation that was a little subjective. And you can move your ratios towards or within these ranges freely. If they are outside the ranges, you don't have to move them. But if you do move them, they can only move towards the ranges. So most of your available movement is downwards, with a couple exceptions. What happens when we move a ratio? Well, it depends on a couple things: how big the class is before you make the change, and how much of a change you make. In this model, we are modeling the effect of moving one more step towards equalizing the multi-res with the new multi-residential and the residential classes. This would be the third of a 4-step process. And that would shift approximately, before levy change, approximately $50,000 off of that class, multi-residential, and it would increase by all other properties by 0.016%. That's about $1.95 for the average residential property. And again, this is not multi-residential is not a huge class, so making that movement, although it's almost 10%, has a fairly modest impact. I mean, that's subjective in some ways. But if we were to say do the same thing with commercial, which is far larger, if we were to do a 10% reduction on that, it would shift a lot more taxes. You'd be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, being a small class, it does have an effect, but not a huge effect. And this would be that continuation. Just on that multi-res, this is the most moved ratio in the province. Many municipalities, including your neighbors, have or are moving these down towards equalization. There's a lot of reasons for this. There's been indications that differential could be forced away at some point, which you wouldn't want to have to absorb the shift all in 1 year. It's also housing. I don't think there's probably anybody on council that doesn't hear a lot about housing. It is one of the biggest issues we've dealt with as municipalities in decades. So it is a very sort of pro-housing friendly move. It will also shift taxes to some degree amongst area municipalities. So we want to, keep that in mind. Generally speaking, it will shift taxes out of property municipalities with more multi-res and into with less. But these are property-specific shifts. At this point, we're just rolling them up. The shifts remain between multi-res and other properties. So, for example, although we see, a shift out of Owen Sound, out of Meaford, that means they have more multi-residential, more multi-residential assessment, and that means that the impact locally is actually higher. This model is also premised on the basis that Owen Sound will make a complementary shift. 50% of your multi-residential assessment approximately is in Owen Sound. So in order for this to take effect, they need to lower theirs too, and they have been. There's been a in step with the county's four-stage migration. Once, whether you make a change or not, whatever your ratios are, municipal levy change and budgetary increases are completely different. They're about how much you raise, not who shares in it. They're always applied equally and last as the final step. Currently, based on the staff report and your budgetary goals, we're looking at a 3.17%. That's what this model uses, levy increase. It applies at the end. Again, it's shared equally on a percentage basis by all properties. And that would apply whether you do the shift or not. So in this case, when we look at those and we layer them on, and I mentioned this, I kind of foreshadowed my discussion around this at the very beginning. We have to consider year over year change. When we look at the county bylaw from one year to the next, there are different influences. And so we want to be, very careful to understand that we have levy change, but we also had growth and potentially this multi-residential shift. While the combined impact of the levy change and the potential multi-res shift means that residential taxpayers will see an increase over year end of 3.35% on that county portion of their levy. If we took the bylaw from last year to this year, we would see far greater changes. And a lot of that has been supplied by new assessment and new revenue in the growth. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that carefully and what the county's spending decisions this year mean. And the same is true at the local level. And then we also had that aggregate shift was contributing to the 3.35. So all of these things contribute to the 3.35, and we want to distinguish those from growth. So that's kind of tells us what we're going to do in terms of start ratios, what you may do in terms of changing that multi-res, and then what that would all mean. The net of those decisions would be, that would be approximately the increase on a residential property and other class properties versus year end. The other topic that I'm going to speak about very briefly is the new multi-residential subclass that's become available. Just to give you an idea of what the multi-residential class is, the multi-residential class is a property with improvements on it, a building or buildings that are made up of 7 or more residential units. So that's a fully fledged residential unit that you can sleep, eat, and live in. They can take the form of apartment buildings, traditional apartment buildings, townhouse complexes, or even in some cases, properties that appear to be detached if they're under a single title. Then we have the new multi-residential class, and the new multi-residential class is basically the same as the multi-res, but it is just any building, any new complex, as the name would suggest, that has come on since April 2017, and that's the date of the building permit. So if a building was built in 2020 it's going to be new multi-res, not multi-res. It is already taxed at a ratio of 1. It's already equalized with residential. Only the older stock continues to be under the multi-residential class, and then vacant land zoned for multi-residential use. If the last year multi-residential was approximately 22% higher than residential and new multi-res, if you make your third jump or move towards equalization, it'll be 11% this year. And the provincial education tax is the same for all 3 classes. So where's the new multi-res subclass? Municipalities can adopt this class and provide a even greater municipal discount to new multi-residential properties. And how it would work is you pick a discount from 0, or just, you wouldn't have a discount of 0, but up to 35%. And once you adopted that, and it doesn't have to be part of your 2025 tax policy because it's not going to apply to any properties this year. Once you adopted that, if I were to come along and take a building permit in Grey Highlands for a multi-residential complex, when that multi-residential complex comes online, I'd be taxed at 35% less than the residential rate. Okay, that's only on the municipal portion. It is not on the education portion, so I'd get a break. You don't have to make a decision on this. It's just out there as an available item. Were you to consider it or want to look at it further, there's some due diligence that you'd want to undertake. Number one, you'd want to have some general projections of what this might mean financially and the shift and the impact on other classes. It's not possible to do precise financial models like I showed you for the multi-res ratio reduction. And that's because the subclass and the properties that would be in it don't exist right now. And we have no idea whether past history is going to be representative of the future. There could be a company out there planning, 10 giant new multi-res towers that we don't know about, and that would change it. But we can look at what it might mean generally. You also have to really look at the qualitative considerations, particularly equity issues. If we had somebody build a property last year and it's new multi-res at a ratio of 1, are you comfortable? Not saying you're not, but are you comfortable with a new partner coming online, a new multi-res building coming online, getting a 35% break, knowing that they are, competing for tenants and they could be the exact or very similar buildings. I also am urging my clients to be very cautious about expectations in terms of outcomes. While this new subclass could be very housing friendly signal, it could serve some certain purposes. There's some strategic ways to use it. It is unlikely that even a 35% reduction in property taxes is going to trigger anybody who wouldn't otherwise be looking to build a multi-res building, come in and build one. That's not how these decisions are made. These are massive, multi-million-dollar, tens of million-dollar investments in properties like this. And generally speaking, people are going to base those decisions on a lot of other issues other than property tax. Well, it'd be great for a break. As a developer, they're going to be looking for tenants. They're going to be looking for land. They're going to be looking for all sorts of things to make that decision. So it's sort of sold as an incentive, and it possibly could be positive, but I don't believe it would independently impact housing stock. It's a subjective comment, but we've done a lot of research on ratio movement, historic research. We've looked at a lot of things about tax policy and multi-residential ratios and growth, and there is no correlation. We haven't been able to identify any correlation in that analysis, and much of it has been very detailed and thorough. So while it's a subjective comment, it's informed by a lot of research and experience. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer, of course, any questions or revisit anything I said.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fries. And just before I open it for council questions, I'll just look to Director Spicer if there's anything she wanted to add before questions.
Through you, Madam Warden, I'll let council ask any questions, and then I can speak to my report.
Okay, thank you very much. And so I'll put it out then for council questions, and if possible, if you could direct the presenters to the slide you're referring to, or if it's a specific question. So I'm looking here online. I don't see hands up. I am looking around the room, and I'm not seeing hands up. Director Spicer, I don't see any hands up in the room. So anything further?
Through you, Madam Warden. I think everything has been covered quite well by Peter, and the only comments I had as far as my report are, of course, that the Upper Tier municipality is responsible for tax policy for 8 of the member municipalities, and these are set annually. And of course, as Peter has mentioned, Owen Sound is responsible for their own policy. And the tax policy apportions the burden across the different tax classes. And so that's, if you approve the report today, then we'll be bringing back a bylaw to pass the policy. Peter's also mentioned that the properties are assessed based on values dated to January 1, 2016. The study that Peter prepared was shared with the member municipality treasurers, and we discussed on a call on February 6th. So the group was in support of continuing the reduction to the multi-res ratio by a quarter of the movement. And as mentioned, Owen Sound reviewed their tax policy report earlier this week, and they also approved a similar reduction. And again, that's important that both Grey County and Owen Sound are in step with the reductions. It doesn't affect the 2025 approved budget that you approved in January. And what it does is adjust the distribution of taxes among the various property tax classes. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking around the room and I don't see any further hands up, nor do I see any online. So, oh, there we go. We'll go over to Councillor Greg.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think we've already moved the motion before the presentation, correct? I would just like to say, yes, we did pass it Monday night at the City of Owen Sound. There's certainly an equity that comes through in the spreadsheets that are provided by Peter in his excellent presentation. I'd like to put the inequity into dollars and what that means for people, because at the end of the day, they just care about the actual dollar amount of their taxes. And I spoke to this on Monday night at Owen Sound. Our residential tax rate in Owen Sound is approximately $1,851 on multi-res, which is the older, and residential per $100,000 of assessment. And the new multi-residential is $1,382 essentially when you extend out the tax rate. So the difference is $469 for what essentially could be the same building side by side, dependent upon when one was built. And it's really hard to describe why you're going to tax one of those entities differently than the other. So our full rate is a $596 per 100,000. And at the county level, I see that currently it's $493 per 100,000 of assessment, $404,000 for the newer multi-residential. So again, we've got $89 per $100,000 of assessment. So again, when you're working with your ratepayers and you are talking about equal buildings, equal properties, one being taxed differently than the others, that's a pretty tough thing to be able to defend, that type of inequity that still exists. So I'm glad to see the recommendation still moving towards merging those to a value of 1 in the ratio. And removing that inequity. And it is positive. I mentioned this Monday night, but I did have a letter provided to me in an email form from a resident, which indicated that they would have a 1.4% reduction for their property tax on their rental unit effective December 31st, 2024. So it's positive to see through Mary Lou's team. And I think Peter's firm is involved in creating those letters and those amounts, but it's good to see that those values are passed on and provided to the residents, so that we are making a real conscious effort in trying to get rid of that inequity and create more balance out there in the community for taxes. So this is my comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And not seeing any further hands. We're ready to call the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, a 5-minute break. I think we'll do a 5-minute break and then we will continue on with the remaining items in section 7 and return to 6A at the end. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, County Council. I appreciated the break time as well as the time for staff to organize what we will be presenting in the next items. So we are ready to move on then to item 7B, which is the Future Ready Gray metrics. It's recommended that report CAOR CW 0425 be received for information along with the attached draft metrics for Future Ready Development Program, and that staff be directed to continue engagement with stakeholders, including local municipalities and the development industry on implementation approaches for Future Ready Development Program, and report back to council with a final set of metrics and a recommended implementation approach. May I ask for a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Kentner, seconded by Councillor Dobreen. It's now on the floor for discussion, and I will look to staff then for Ms. Swanston. You'd like to come forward?
Thank you. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the report. Do I share my screen or you're going to share it for me? Fantastic. So the Future Ready Development Program is a project you'll have heard about before. Previously, it would have been called the Tri-County Green Development Standard. The program has evolved over the past year. We've been working on it, and in reflection of some of those evolutions, we've also renamed it the Future Ready Development Program. These types of programs seek to establish consistent metrics for performance of new development. Those metrics can be for things like energy efficiency, complete streets, tree canopy, and then use existing planning processes to implement them, allowing us to recognize and celebrate development that achieves a higher performance standard, while also supporting our industry with education and information about opportunities to develop in a more high-performing way. The context, why are we doing this? So the province of Ontario, along with all provinces, have committed that by 2030, we will have net zero building codes, meaning that at the provincial level, all new construction will need to achieve net zero ready energy and emissions, meaning they'll be highly energy efficient. They will have the opportunity to produce as much energy as they use were they to install renewable energy. So really, this program is about supporting our local development industry and being ready for those building codes. We want to make sure that we are well positioned to benefit from this shift towards low carbon construction and also resilient construction. So ensuring that the homes that are built in our area are ready for the increases in extreme weather that we anticipate and know that we will be experiencing. We have a lot of existing clean energy expertise regionally, and we want to be able to leverage that and support it as much as possible. Going Green and Gray, our climate change action plan, identifies that these kind of programs are a real opportunity to reduce local greenhouse gas pollution. We know that by making sure we build resiliently and energy efficiently now, it's going to be cheaper and less disruptive than if we need to go in and retrofit later. Homes with higher energy performance are cheaper to operate. And if you look at the total cost of ownership, so the upfront cost to build and then the ongoing lifetime cost to operate, they are lower. There is an initial cost increment. So it does cost more initially to build to a higher energy efficient standard, but that's estimated to be between 3 to 5% of the total project cost. Which is something obviously that needs to be seriously considered, but also looked at in the context of other cost drivers such as inflation. In a 2023 survey, 60% of Ontarians said that energy efficiency was important or very important in their next home purchase, be it their first home or a subsequent home. And of those, 65% were motivated by reducing their monthly utility bills. So we know that this is a cost concern for Ontario residents and something that we hope this program can help alleviate. In terms of the project itself, the next two slides provide a bit of a timeline of what we've been doing, but some of the key points outlined in the report is that this project is in partnership with Dufferin and Wellington counties. We received $445,000 from Enercan in grant funding to support this work as they recognize the need to accelerate energy efficient construction across the country. We, through a competitive procurement process, hired Urban Equation and the Planning Partnership to support us in the technical work to make sure that any of the metrics that are being proposed are grounded in the best current science and knowledge around construction and development. This slide indicates that we did start by talking to the public to find out from local residents their interest and support for these kind of ideas, and also what their vision would be for a resilient and energy efficient construction in the future. When we came to refining the standards or refining the metrics, so actually getting into the technical piece, we really centered input and advice from our local development industry and also the local municipality planning staff. We held conversations, many conversations. So with industry, there were 3 different sessions in April, June, November of 2024 with 114 participants across those. And then subsequently, Scott and myself held 5 one-on-one meetings with local developers to hear from them directly, folks who are building in our area, their thoughts, concerns, or suggestions. And in terms of your local municipal planning and building staff, similarly, there were 3 Grey County sessions, one in May, June, and October of 2024, and each had between 20 and 30 attendees. So just know that the metrics that are attached to this report have been sort of viewed and considered and had feedback from really a diversity of key stakeholders. This graphic is very tiny when you look at it from a distance, but rather than, I can certainly provide details on some of the other municipalities who have implemented building performance programs. But I think what you can see in this map is that we are certainly not alone. There are 15 jurisdictions in Ontario that have implemented building performance programs, the earliest in 2006. So these are not new tools or programs. That said, we need to just take what we can learn from these other programs and make sure that we're finding an approach that makes sense in Grey County. We certainly know that things are not going to be transferable. So it's not that we've taken a performance program from Ajax and said, let's do that in Grey, but rather tried to understand what's worked and what hasn't, and then put it through the filter of our local development and planning industry. We are working in partnership with Wellington and Dufferin to create a consistent development environment. One of the pieces of feedback from the development community is they don't want to have to be looking at a patchwork of different programs. So by providing that consistency across the region, the intention is to simplify and make it easier for our developers to participate. We do know that looking at jurisdictions that have these kinds of programs, there's been no reduction in housing starts. So I know we all want to be building for the future, making sure our homes are efficient and resilient to extreme weather, but most importantly, we want to make sure there are homes for our residents. And what we're hearing from our colleagues in jurisdictions that have these programs is that this hasn't slowed down development. So how would this all happen? So as I mentioned, it would be integrated into existing planning processes. So these kind of programs leverage the municipal authority to define a complete development application. And so if implemented, this program would indicate that to submit a complete application, the development would need to include a performance metrics checklist. And I'll speak a bit more about the details of that, but that's sort of the mechanism. Initially, this program could apply to residential developments of 10 plus units. So if someone's building a single home, they could choose to participate, but that's not really the design of the program. And similarly, at this time, the design of the draft metrics in front of you is not intended for industrial or commercial properties. It's really about residential. In response to those many meetings and sessions of feedback and response, we have adjusted some of the elements of the program in response to that feedback. So we're suggesting or discussing the possibility of a points-based system. So this is to allow greater flexibility. So you would see there's the attached metrics to the report. Each of those metrics would have an allocation of points. And if a development pursued one of those metrics and illustrated they had met the metric threshold, they would be allocated the points associated with it. So this allows greater flexibility where a developer can say this makes sense for this development or this doesn't make sense, and sort of pursue the things that are most appropriate. The metrics fall into 4 categories: natural environment, community and transportation, built environment, which is where energy efficiency falls. And then there's also the opportunity to discuss the idea of then having a section for regional or local priorities, where either each county or even individual municipalities could say, beyond what's already in this program, these are key priorities for us. I will note that our Grey County official plan already has enabling language for this kind of program. It was introduced in a previous update. And also that these programs really are about outcome-based targets. We're not prescribing how construction materials or methods, because those are really appropriately governed under the Ontario Building Code. So this kind of program would be complementary to the health and safety requirements that fall under the OBC. So this possible points-based system, each of the metrics in the appendix to the report, as I mentioned, would have a different points allocation. And in the next report back to you, we could present sort of different points thresholds. So if a development achieved approximately 40% of the available points, they could be recognized as a bronze future-ready building in gray. If they were to achieve 60%, a silver. And if they were to achieve most of the points, 80% of the points, they could be a gold, so a gold star future ready development. Again, there's still flexibility. You could have different pathways to achieving these different thresholds of points. The report also discusses and presents different implementation options. At this time, we're not recommending an implementation option, but rather seeking to present different approaches we could consider. Optional would allow developers to submit a metric checklist for recognition if they chose. Voluntary could indicate that a completed development application should include a metric checklist, but it would be entirely discretionary as to which points the development pursued. It would simply be an opportunity for us to collect data on what kind of development is already happening in our area, what kind of high performance elements are already being included. And the third option would be performance thresholds. So what we see in most of those other jurisdictions that currently have these programs is some kind of minimum points threshold, where any new development that is brought forward needs to achieve a certain foundation level of points to be considered in compliance. The report discusses one potential implementation pathway that would start in phase 1, where it would be a voluntary approach throughout. And in phase 1, we would say, please complete the checklist, let us know what you're doing, help us gather the data that we need to better support you in high performance development. Then after an initial period, potentially of 2 years of reporting, we could phase in a requirement to meet that bronze performance threshold based on how that first pilot period went. And then throughout, from the initial implementation and onwards, all development would be recognized for meeting whatever level of performance it achieved, be it bronze, silver, or gold. The categories of the checklist metrics are, as I mentioned, natural environment, community and transportation, built environment, and then that option for regional priorities. So these are really sort of established elements of high performance development. So ensuring that the natural environment is being protected, that our tree canopy, native and adaptive species, so things that make sense to be growing here, our stormwater quality, park access, etc. In community and transportation, there would be the opportunity to pursue points related to electric vehicle readiness or walkable and complete streets. And then in the built environment section, again, the energy efficiency points available for solar readiness, and also points available for construction and waste management. So really best practices all being rewarded. So I've just pulled out one of the metrics that's appended to the report. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but rather speak to kind of the overall layout of what each metric would include. So it would be indicated when this metric would be applicable, be it at site plan or draft plan of subdivision, when it could be evaluated, the total number of points that would be available, and then a breakdown of the requirements to achieve the different points thresholds. So here you can see there's 1 point available, or propose the potential for 1 point to be available simply for preparing an energy strategy report. So just showing that the developer has thought about different pathways to energy efficiency, 1 point would be available. And then actually achieving different levels of improved energy performance, additional points would be possible. And then at the bottom, you can see that it starts to lay out how these different elements could be evaluated, what kind of documentation would be considered part of a complete application. So the next steps are to incorporate any feedback we receive or comments today as we move forward. To continue to work to finalize the draft metrics. So we are, circling back again with key stakeholders, and then really continue to explore implementation approaches based on the feedback today. So talking with local municipalities, we do, through the NRCan funding that I mentioned, have funding to fully support a staff person to work on the implementation phase, make sure that it receives the consideration that it requires. And that staff person would continue to work with local developers to understand the barriers and opportunities to this project. And one of the pieces of the work that hopefully will support that is we also have NRCan funding to do a talent and business attraction and retention plan. So working hopefully, well, we haven't signed any agreements yet, but working with local expertise to understand how we can best support our development industry and what kind of training or development opportunities might be needed to successfully implement this program. So with that, I will happily take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, then we will look to, and if I could just have the screen. Thank you. So I can keep an eye out for anybody that's online. Looking around the room, I see a question from Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you for the report. A couple of things come to mind that maybe you did mention. It's sighting of, like, sun goes this way, sighting of your building. Sometimes I think there's some method to the madness of that for solar energy, like even through your windows, larger windows to the south, smaller windows to the north, or I mean, a lot of farmsteads. You did talk about trees, but a lot of times trees can work as windbreaks. It keeps, when the wind blows, it sucks energy out of your house because of wind chill and stuff. Also, material of homes. We've seen more with, and I'm not sure if something changing with the building code, but we've seen communities disappear from a fire and that type of thing, and the reasons around that type of thing. It's a little bit maybe off, but I just don't know if there's some suggested changes to the building code that, whether it's brick or steel or stuff like that, is resilient if there is changes or effects from climate change as well. I don't know if you have any comments. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, there is one metric around the funnily titled embodied carbon, which does look at building materials from an emissions perspective. We have seen an increase, perhaps counterintuitively, in mass timber. So actually using timber for low-rise development, in that it does meet the fire safety requirements that we need, but allows us to use less or create less carbon pollution in the construction phase. And certainly, I would say we would defer to the OBC for things around emergency preparedness. This program is really around sort of exceeding or higher performance than that, but there are within the OBC requirements around post-disaster buildings and things around, tying down rooms appropriately for extreme winds. So we defer to OBC for the health and safety of our development, and then would suggest this program can enhance beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions here? Yes, Councillor Dicker.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you for the report. Just looking at some of the metrics that are there for getting points, and are we creating an expectation on the part of developers when it's, if you say you're within 10 minutes of a transit system and we don't really have transit in our communities, or the other one is even organics, are we creating a challenge for ourselves going forward that we need to have those available as a municipality if we're going to ask builders and developers to meet that standard?
thank you through the chair. Certainly, there is, as in working with the local municipality, we've been asking exactly that kind of question. Do we have the servicing currently to support the metrics that are being prepared? One of the pieces of feedback we actually got specifically on the transit one was the idea that we should amend it. Currently, it says a transit stop, but we would be looking to alter that to a transit route or a potential future transit route. So recognizing this is as we're building homes, especially larger subdivisions, we're sort of locking in the built form for decades to come. And so we would look at municipal plans around servicing and make sure that anything that is being allocated points aligns with intended servicing at the municipal level. Are we setting an expectation? I mean, I think this program seeks to support and promote development that is aligned with our community objectives. So there's lots of pathways to compliance. You would be able to meet the points thresholds without pursuing specific ones, but insofar as transit readiness or diverse waste management options are aligned with our community priorities, then I would say, yes, this program further supports those. Maybe I think it's like, yeah.
And I agree with, having those targets is good. It's just if it becomes entrenched and required at some point in time, and when I read through it, it kind of looked it would move in that direction that, is required, then would we have developers saying, well, I can't meet it because you're not supplying it. So that's just a concern as I look forward at the system that you're proposing right now as voluntary or whatever it might be, doesn't create that problem. But if we take those next steps, it could.
Yeah, through you, Warden, and further to what Linda's provided and to specifically to Councillor Dickett's questions. And part of that is why one of the pathways to potential implementation of this is to look at some of those voluntary approaches as well as looking at a points-based system, recognizing that there may be some services that are provided in some municipalities and not in others. So making sure that there's flexibility in the process or in the system and metrics to be able to identify other potential pathways to achieve certain points. But again, starting with a voluntary program where we can, as Linda indicated, work with the development industry, work with builders, work with education institutions like local Georgian College and others to be able to provide and get ready for some of these changes that are going to happen. As Linda indicated earlier, the OBC building code is set to go to net zero requirements by 2030 for all new buildings. And so how can we work together as municipalities and as building industry and everybody in between to be able to get ready for those changes here locally. So that's what we think the program will be truly beneficial for, is to make sure that everybody is both future ready for those inevitable changes.
Okay, thank you for those answers. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Body next.
Just first to comment on the topic that's out there. Of course, the provincial planning policy talks about urban development and urban settings, and having a development out in the middle of nowhere on water and septic beds where there's no schools and there's no shopping and there's et cetera, is going to lead to more transportation, more driving like this winter, more SUVs, I suppose. So I think it is important that we plan, and maybe should have been planning for years, but it doesn't matter now. Having more urban development in urban settings. My concern is, and I voiced it right at the start, when Bruce County isn't participating in this, we got to make sure, and I guess this is a question, I'm stating it as a statement, but are we really working, like, if we presented the implementation pathway categories and things to the development business, we have to have developers buying in. I've received phone calls from developers that were upset and they're just going to build in Bruce County. Now, will they, when they've got an investment of land in this area, at some point they've got to cash in on their investment. But I think it's really important if we're going to have buy-in, that we've got buy-in from the developers and that they're the central part of this, and that we're not making good environmental decisions and them being left out of the process. So we've met with them. Are we taking their feedback? Are we using it? Are we keeping them happy and keeping them involved, I guess is my question.
Through the chair, thank you for the question, and I'll maybe invite Scott also to add his comments after. But yes, we have made a number of modifications to the program in response to what we've heard in those meetings. We initially, there was a this may not please you based on your previous comment, but an urban density, a density requirement, but it wasn't specified between settlement and rural, and we took that out because we heard that it wasn't feasible. We have modified to this points-based system in direct response to requests for flexibility. We are, taking on board other specific suggestions and kind of considering them. You can well imagine this kind of program, it's impossible to make everyone happy. And so that is partly the intent with the flexible system, because we do have local developers already who are building entirely net zero ready homes in Bray County. So we know these things are possible locally, and we want to give them the opportunity to be recognized for doing that, while also recognizing that there may be constraints or different priorities with different developers. So I think, yes, we are being responsive to the industry and simultaneously recognizing that we're trying to keep everyone happy enough, but are unlikely to be able to fully satisfy all requests. But I'll let Scott add his.
Yeah, through you, Madam Warden. Thank you for your comments and questions, Councillor Body. And I echo what Linda said. Like we met with a diverse range of developers and builders in the area. And to me, I'd almost lump it into two buckets. Those that build residential plans of subdivision and those that build multi-unit buildings like apartment buildings or condo buildings in that regard. So even if we look at potential standards like EV readiness for parking, that looks a lot different if you're saying on the outside of your home you need an outlet kind of thing, versus if you're saying for all 400 spots in a surface level parking lot, you need a plug kind of thing, because that gets quite expensive. So we've been learning a lot from the development community. As Linda said, I don't think we're going to satisfy everybody, but the chief request that we heard was flexibility. And part of the reason for this program, as both Linda and Randy have shared, is to be ready for that 2030 building code. And so I think it's baby steps along the way, working together to get there. And I suspect we'll still see further changes between some of the metrics now and what finally gets presented to council in a number of months' time. But we are trying to listen not only to the developers, but one of the other key audiences, and Linda mentioned this, was the local building officials too. And because that's not a service we offer at the county, we need to understand how they're going to look at this and how that interacts with the Ontario Building Code in that regard.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Councillor Dobreen next.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. The question that I have, maybe twofold. This is a recognition program. There's no financial benefit to the developer other than it'll be a recognition program. Were the private builders the ones for those lots out in rural Ontario on agricultural properties consulted, or would they be eligible because the individuals who are building those custom homes, they're not high density, but they do employ geothermal or heat pumps or solar panels. They're maybe incorporating EV readiness. And I think having the local building officials involved can also include providing a handout to those people applying for permits that could then oh, well, if I incorporate this, I might get a little plaque that goes on my house, and that encourages others who visit to understand the process. I'm just wondering if any consultation was had with the custom builders in our community.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, yes, it should confirm it is a recognition program. We did discuss and have some exploration of potential incentives of those other municipalities that currently have these kind of programs. Only one currently offers a financial incentive, and that's City of Toronto in the form of a development charge rebate. At this time, it didn't seem feasible or appropriate to suggest that kind of incentivization in our program. And this, again, my apologies, I may look to Scott on this. I am unsure if the developers we invited to participate, who certainly do those larger 10-unit plus, also do custom homes. But I think it's a great suggestion. The metrics would certainly be applicable on a single home. So we could take back and consider if we would have the internal capacity to be evaluating custom homes against the metrics. But in terms of providing education and information, that would certainly be something we could look at and likely recommend. And I will just maybe ask Scott if he knows if the developers who we have spoken to also build custom homes or just those larger developments.
Thanks, Linda, through you, Warden Matrosofts. We did speak with a diverse range of developers. Some of them do the odd, larger custom home in that regard. A lot of them have, a series of model that you can choose from, not necessarily cookie cutter in any sort of derogatory way, but they have their preferred building styles, but some do custom. The one sort of distinguishment I'd make here, and Linda, jump in if I go completely astray, is that these future ready development metrics, I probably have my words wrong there, are applying at the planning stages for sort of larger developments. So these would be subdivisions or condominiums or site plans in that regard. So, if you had a rural severance or if you had an existing rural lot where somebody was building one of those homes, no doubt we'd love to have the expertise in our community that they could build and have a green home in that regard, whether that be at the builder level or whether that be at the municipal staff or CBO level. But it wouldn't necessarily apply to people coming in for severances or building permits in that regard. It only applies to those sort of larger, higher order development applications. And just to loop back to Councillor Body's comment, those are applications in the county plan that we focus within our settlement areas. And that actually leads into the next report too, but I'll wait and speak more then.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Councillor Gregg next.
Thank you, Warden. Just a couple of quick questions. And for precision here, I've heard that we had lots of good consultation, but there's a sentence in here that states developers and home builders from across all 3 counties were invited, and across the 3 sessions, there were 114 participants. Am I to read correctly that that's referring to 114 actual home builders and developers? I just want accuracy there. What is a participant in those meetings?
Through the chair, it would refer to maybe state my understanding of the question. I would not be able to confirm that there were 114 different home builders or developers. I would need to go back and kind of go through who participated, but yes, across those 3 sessions, definitely there were, for example, Sinclair Homes, which participated in multiple sessions, or Barry's, which participated in multiple sessions. So I don't have the count for you, I think, to answer your specific question, but yes, those participants all represented different local builders.
Okay, that's good. Happy to hear that. You referred to the GTA, and they already have green development standards in place. And the reasons that people build where they do largely is driven by demand. And that's obvious that that's where people need to build because they can't afford to build in Toronto. It's extended out from the GTA, and it's a cost of living for people and housing affordability. What lessons were learned from these municipalities? Yes, they didn't see a slowdown in building, but that's obvious because you're still just, you can't leapfrog 2.5 hours away to still drive to work in Toronto. Was there any lessons learned, takeaways in terms of what type of increases may have been contributed to the housing affordability crunch that we hear so often about? Because that's certainly, I think, the concern of many is we always hear about housing affordability. I want to know, what is this contributing potentially to that discussion? What are our takeaways from the GTA? Yes, there are developments happening anyway. What's incorporating these enhancements done to the cost of housing?
Through the chair. So the estimate generally is that there's that 3 to 5% initial increase in cost of construction. Some of the things we heard, we spoke with a developer who is starting to build in Mississauga, but primarily has built it in Toronto. It seemed that for sort of the tenure of her career, the Toronto Green Standard had always been in place. And we asked explicitly around, oh, do you have a sense of what this does to your pro forma? And they don't even analyze it because it's just how it's done. So, and again, Toronto, very different development context from ours, but I think just to share that it over time has really normalized. We didn't hear from other jurisdictions around price increases. It's hard. There's so, as you're well aware, there's so many factors that are feeding into the price of a house. It's really hard to tease out. This is what was driven by a high performance requirement. But ensuring ongoing affordability, there is a section of a points or an allocation of points in the draft metrics specifically around affordable and attainable housing. So making sure that housing affordability is woven in with any environmental performance requirements.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we have to be cognizant of that moving forward, because at the end of the day, for many people, where they build and what they build is contingent upon what the bank provides them. And if they can't meet a certain borrowing threshold, then they've encountered further challenges. So every contribution we make to that cost is something to consider. When you get into some of the, I think, did you have any discussions about underground parking is obviously better than on ground and has stormwater impacts? Permeable driveways is much better than paved over. Do you get into also some of the discussion? I know there's commentary about sidewalks. Concrete comes at a very high carbon cost to construct. Sometimes there may be instances where it's very tough to advocate for sidewalks on both sides of the streets, but save the planet at the same time, because the sidewalks that you're just advocating for here come with a really big carbon cost of construction. And once you've paved over paradise, it's kind of gone, as opposed to saying, the street is good enough. Can we live within our means that way? Can you just expand on some of those considerations that you've maybe had? I guess, and are there certain conversations you've had that are more localized that are different than the GTA 2 that already has them in place?
Thank you for the question. So to be a bit of a broken record, I think we really looked at that flexibility piece. So there are points available for embodied carbon, which is exactly what you're talking about, that high upfront carbon cost of a sidewalk, right? So for a development that looks to reduce embodied carbon, which would include an analysis around concrete and sidewalks, there's points available there. As it's currently drafted, the complete streets points available, and I want to double check this. Don't believe that we stipulate. I think we do stipulate a sidewalk, but we're not asking for sidewalks on both sides of the street. To your point, our context is a bit different. We don't have the densities that really benefit from dual sidewalks. In speaking with the local developers, we heard specific comments around really making sure we're sufficiently recognizing the construction of attainable housing. That was a local comment that we got. So affordable, attainable housing. I had some great comments around some of the first comments from Councillor McQueen around, are we providing points for building orientation? If the footprint of a subdivision has deliberately excluded an adjacent woodland, are they getting points? And we're still trying to figure out what that might look like, because what we're currently talking about in here is more about the trees within the footprint of the development. We did receive, significant constructive feedback on the technical elements of the metrics from local developers. And that was, I think, part of why NRCan funded this. We're not the first rural jurisdiction to try and do something like this, but we are one of the first. It's another example of Gray being an innovator. And so knowing that the GTA metrics and programs aren't going to work here, so how do we need to modify them?
Okay, so next we'll go to Councillor Kentner.
Thank you, and through you, Warden Matrosovs. Linda, I was glad to hear you mention Sinclair Homes. And we're very fortunate in Meaford to be having a net zero subdivision built at this time. And from what I know, prices are quite competitive. Yeah, and there's a lot of interest in the savings in operating a net zero home. What I wanted to ask is, are you aware, are there any other specific net zero subdivisions in other parts of Grey County?
Madam Warden, this answer is going to sound like I'm pandering. No, I think Meaford's a bit of a trendsetter here with this particular developer. I'm not personally aware. We've had certainly individual homes, and we've had individual homeowners come to both climate staff and planning staff to say, hey, we'd love to give you a tour of our home because these are all the wonderful things we've done. But I'm not aware personally of another developer in Grey that is building an entire development of either net zero or net zero ready. That said, hopefully this will be a bit of a showcase for the area, and we can see lots of others in the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking around the room, and I'll go to Councillor McQueen and then to Councillor Keaveney.
I will be quick. Just in a general form, over in Europe, they have heat source that comes from some other place that's generated in a huge system that goes into. Is there any of that type of development being looked upon in the future, in the sense of it could, you said you get points to run wire to your attic to put a solar panel, but it could be a commercial type solar panel, or it could be a commercial type wind generation or something that everybody sort of like a condominium type thing, but they're all take that heat source because maybe economies of scale.
Thank you, through you, Warden. So there aren't currently points allocated, but certainly that concept of district energy is very much front of mind. There are examples of subdivisions in Markham that are the heating is like electricity, so it's a service. So it's not an in-home furnace or an in-home heat pump, but rather a district system that provides heating. It does require a certain amount of density as a solution. We recently met with staff from Enbridge Sustain, which is sort of the sustainability arm of Enbridge that works on things like district energy, and they have offered to provide information or presentations to our local planning staff around what district solutions could maybe look like in Grey. So I don't think we're at the stage of readiness where it would be appropriate to be trying to allocate points, but it's certainly a technology and approach that we're exploring. Mm-hmm.
Okay, next we'll go to Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Warden Matrosovs, and thank you, Linda, for the report. And I wondered if I could ask, I understand the program predominantly applies to home builds, but I'm curious to understand if our Rockwood Terrace construction could be evaluated and if standards could apply, because how wonderful it would be to be able to promote Rockwood Terrace as a silver or a gold standard build. It would just be a great model for this program in the county.
We're going to go to the deputy CAO.
Thank you for that question through you, Warden. So with respect to the Rockwood Terrace, the new Rockwood Terrace, right from the beginning, we identified and we did a net zero assessment to determine what elements could be incorporated as part of that build to be at a minimum net zero ready. So right now we're on the pathway to make sure that it's at least net zero ready, and really to make it full net zero is by adding solar panels at some point in the future. And as part of the build, we're actually putting in conduit to be able to allow for solar panel hookups, both rooftop as well as in areas in the property, to eventually make that full build fully net zero. So by adding those solar panels, not calculating the points and stuff like that, would be achieving essentially what would be considered probably a gold standard as associated with Rockwood Terrace once we add those solar panels. So we've incorporated energy efficiencies into the HVAC systems, the actual building envelope, making sure that it's as airtight as possible, while ensuring obviously that it's still comfortable for residents and staff. From an overall building perspective, that will in turn hopefully keep our energy costs lower than what it would have otherwise been, but also being able to achieve a net zero status in the near future as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not seeing any further hands up nor online. So thank you very much, Mrs. Swanston, for all that. And thank you to other staff members that have contributed as well. In that case, then I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. So we are going to need to break for lunch at this point and carry on with the remainder of the agenda afterwards. Madam Clerk, lunch until? Okay, so we will come back then at 1:15 for the conclusion of our agenda. Thank you very much. Thank you, County Council. So we are now returning from our lunch break and we are going to pick up on item 7C. And with that, there is a recommendation that PDR CW 2025 be received and that all written and oral submissions on official plan amendment number 23 were considered and helped to make an informed recommendation and decision. And that proposed county official plan amendment number 23 to amend the county's rural designation permitted uses and development policies be supported, and a bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment be prepared for consideration by county council. May I ask for a mover? Moved by Councillor Keaveney, seconder. Seconded by Councillor Carlton. It's now on the floor for discussion, so I will look to Director Taylor. And you're after lunch today.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Warden, and good afternoon, members of council. I'm not used to saying that. Yeah, thank you for your patience. And what we have before us is maybe the exciting conclusion to OPA 23, which first began in September of 2024. And so just as a bit of a background, I'll just let the slides catch up there, but I'm sure they're coming any second here now. Actually, I can just get going. It's all just words anyway. On the slides, I don't mean the hollow words. Sorry, digging myself a hole here. So the county official plan was approved in 2019, and it's been updated a number of times since then. What's council's maybe most used to seeing is the updates that come through privately initiated official plan amendments. So those would be developers or residents initiating an official plan amendment. But we have done a few that are county initiated as well. And sort of the genesis behind official plan amendment number 23 is to clarify some of the policies primarily in the county's rural designation. There were a few policies in there and some permitted uses that at the time when the province approved the county's official plan in 2019 seemed well crafted and seemed like they would serve the county well. But quite frankly, we've had some questions on some of those and we've had some misinterpretations on some of those policies. So we look to update the county official plan through OPA 23 to clarify some of those policies. Official Plan Amendment number 23 is not a fulsome consistency exercise with the provincial planning statement. No doubt we've considered the provincial planning statement, but it's much more broad than just the rural uses. And as council may be aware and was in the 2025 budget, the county is updating its growth management strategy right now. And the growth management strategy is that document that looks 25 to 30 years in the future to look at what our population and employment growth projections will be. And for the first time this year, the province has structured it such that we're formally also assessing the Ministry of Finance's population projections in that regard. So staff fully anticipate once that growth management strategy is updated, there will be a need for further updates to the county official plan. One of the things that it will help tell us is whether or not we have adequate land availability and supply to support our future growth needs, or whether or not there needs to be growth in any of our settlement areas in that regard. And so if you like, this official plan amendment number 23 is a bit of an interim amendment, laser focused on our rural policies. And at some point in the future, post that growth management strategy update, we would be looking to do a more fulsome consistency exercise with the provincial planning statement 2024 in that regard. And okay. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for filling in there. If I could go to the next slide, that would be great. And so within the scope of the official plan amendment, there's no mapping changes proposed in the policy. So we're not changing any of the rural lands to agricultural or vice versa. We're not updating the hazard lands or anything of that nature. We're also not changing any of our settlement area policies. So strictly speaking, this official plan amendment affects 7 of our 9 municipalities, because both the town of Hanover and city of Owen Sound are entirely in the primary settlement area. And as I said, it's focused on the rural policies. More specifically, we're looking at some of the permitted uses in rural, and we're also looking at some of the development criteria that back up those permitted uses. There are 2 very minor changes to the agricultural policies. One was due to an existing error whereby one section of the plan read one way with respect to aggregates in the agricultural designation, and another section read another way. And the second change in the agricultural designation is simply to align the agricultural policies with new policies that are being updated in the rural designation. This is not a radical rewrite of the philosophy behind the rural designation. This really is a refinement in that regard. One of the things we do need to stress, and this was stressed back in the initial presentation in September and also at the public meeting on November 7th, is OPA 23 would not apply to existing applications that are already in process. If approved by County Council at a later date, it would apply on a go-forward basis should there be no appeals, but it doesn't apply to those applications that are already before county and municipal councils in that regard. So if I go on to the next slide, please, Rayburn. Thank you. And so as I mentioned, we did have a public meeting on November 7th. Some of you were in attendance for that meeting. We've had comments both in writing and through the public meeting from a number of public bodies and some members of the public and developers in that regard. We heard from the Grand River and Nottawasaga Conservation Authorities. We heard from Belkenda, Enbridge Gas, staff at the municipality of West Grey, a planning firm, MHBC Planning, on behalf of their client, Thornbury Acres. And we also heard from Cobide Engineering. And I'll get into a summary of those comments in just a second. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing didn't comment on OPA 23, but we did have a chat with their staff based on some of the comments we received and based on trying to clarify some of the interpretation matters with respect to the Provincial Planning Statement 2024. And so, as was noted in the motion, the comments were very useful to the OPA 23 process and have resulted in some changes in the final OPA that's before council versus that version that was initially presented at in the September 2024 and at the public meeting. So we'll go over some of those changes in just a second. If we could go on to the next slide here, please. With respect to the comments that were received, there is a detailed summary in the staff report, along with a staff response to each of those comments. But we'll just give a very high level summary just for the purpose of the presentation. There was no concerns or objections from both from Enbridge, Bell, Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, and Grand River Conservation Authority. West Grey staff had some very useful suggestions for some minor policy changes, just to clarify some of the policies in Official Plan Amendment number 23 and to clarify some of the intent in that regard. We did hear concerns from MHBC Planning over the impact on existing applications, that being their client Thornbury Acres, and some of the policies with respect to the residential farm cooperatives. In response to those comments, we have added a site-specific exception in the residential farm cooperative policies with respect to the Thornbury Acres development that's already in process. Strictly speaking, that exception didn't, arguably 100% need to be added because it's already clear that this only applies on a go-forward basis. But just to make that 100% crystal clear, we did add in that site-specific exception. We also heard some comments from Committe Engineering, who put forward the idea that there should be broader permitted uses in the county's rural designation. Specifically, they said the county's rural designation should permit modular home parks and that they're a very attainable form of housing that could be considered across the countryside where they could be serviced appropriately. I'm going to respond to that further in just a second, but I just wanted to flag that for council. And they also had some concerns with respect to some of the limitations that were being placed on residential development associated with resource-based recreational uses. And they had some concerns with the as they called it, the blanket ban on plans of subdivision and condominium in the rural designation. And I'll say on a number of these fronts, the subdivisions and condominiums, this isn't new to official plan amendment number 23. The county official plan already doesn't permit subdivisions and condominiums as of right in the rural designation, with the exception of agriminiums. And so this is just refining those policies. Similar to some of the comments we heard on Linda's report today, the county wants to provide rural areas that are first and foremost supporting our resource-based uses in terms of farming, aggregate uses, forestry. We also want healthy natural environment, and we want a diversified rural economy in the rural areas of Grey County. So there is limited residential development allowed in those rural areas, but we're not looking to open these up to large-scale residential developments in the forms of plans of subdivision and condominium. Staff really do believe, even after reviewing the provincial planning statement 2024, that those uses are better supported in our settlement areas where we have both those hard and soft services, which support residential development in that regard. And I'll go on to the next slide, if you will. So based on some of the comments we heard, specifically this first one is with respect to comments we heard from staff at the municipality of West Grey. We made some changes to the policies around where you'd support contractors' yards or plumbing shops in that regard. We clarified the terminology being skilled trades and that those uses were to be small scale in size. We clarified some of the locational criteria around institutional uses and special event venues. And again, those are meant to be small scale as well. As I noted, we added in that site-specific exception for the Thornbury Acres development, and we updated some of the development criteria as it pertained to agriminiums and residential farm cooperatives and resource-based recreational uses. In support of these development criteria, we also updated the definitions for some of these terms in the back of the plan. Go on to the next slide here. And so as we get into the planning policy analysis, again, this is a refinement. This isn't a radical rethink. The official plan amendment number 23 is not touching any of the lands in the Niagara Escarpment Plan area. As such, the county plan will continue to conform to the Niagara Escarpment Plan. And furthermore, we're not touching any of our settlement area policies. There are some sections of the provincial planning statement that have been pointed out to us by some individuals in the name of supporting broader forms of residential development across the countryside and in rural areas. And with respect to that, I'll say that the provincial planning statement is written to apply to all municipalities across Ontario. And the scope of rural municipalities across Ontario is very different. We have some rural municipalities in Ontario that don't have a single settlement area. So I think one of the general thrusts of the PPS 2024 was to allow for some development in those areas such that those municipalities could have new housing development in that regard. But that's not the case for any of our 9 member municipalities. All of our 9 municipalities have at least one, if not multiple, settlement areas. So through official plan amendment number 23 and the existing county official plan policies, staff really strove to strike a balance between the types of development that would be permitted in our rural areas and the types of development that might be better suited to our settlement areas. And there are specific sections in the provincial planning statement which read, growth may be directed to rural lands, including where municipalities do not have a settlement area. And similarly, rural areas, and more specifically, rural settlement areas shall be the focus of growth. And so while we understand where some other planners might see further latitude in these policies and look to open up the rural designation to plans of subdivision or things like modular home parks, we really do think in order to provide that balance, the county does need to take a bit of a restrictive approach, which is consistent with our existing approach in that regard. With respect to modular homes, definitely we agree that they can be a more attainable form of housing. So we'd love to see them in our settlement areas, whether that be our secondary settlement areas, our inland lakes and shoreline, even some of our primary settlement areas. On an individual basis or as an additional residential unit, they would be completely fine in the rural designation or the agricultural designation. But a larger scale modular home park like 300 units or 400 units are something we don't see as necessarily being compatible with rural service levels in that regard. And as such, the direction in OPA 23 is to continue to direct those uses to settlement areas. And maybe if we could just go to the next slide. So there's a number of reasons why we would continue to direct those to settlement areas. One is to strengthen our settlement areas where municipalities in the county have already made significant infrastructure investments in those areas. And as I said, they have the hard and soft services to support growth. If we suddenly start allowing for subdivisions all across the countryside, it makes those 20-acre, 30-acre properties in a secondary settlement area less attractive if you can simply put just to build those subdivisions anywhere. We also see greater instances of conflict when we start building or introducing large new non-farm developments in the countryside. Conflict with farm uses, conflict with aggregate uses, conflict with sometimes the natural environment or forestry. And so by arguably saying no to one thing in one location, we're saying yes to something else. So we're saying yes to supporting our farmers. We're saying yes to supporting our aggregate operations and our other resource-based uses that we need across the countryside. The county's rural designation still does have a fair bit of flexibility. We still permit severances just as we have for a number of years. We submit all forms of agricultural uses, including agricultural related uses, on-farm diversified uses. We support resource-based recreational uses, so you can still do things like open a campground or have those tourist amenities across the countryside. We support buildings and yards associated with skilled trades, as we talked about earlier. And we are still supporting residential farm cooperatives and agriminiums on a scaled back basis. And so one of the things we've learned is there can be different definitions of those terms and different interpretations. So we're looking at clarifying some of those interpretations. We're also clarifying the policies around small scale event venues. We've seen many proposals over the years where someone would buy a farm and look to open up what we affectionately call a wedding barn or turn the drive shed into a wedding facility. And we see on a certain scale, there's a use for those across the countryside, and particularly in the rural designation rather than the agricultural designation. But there needs to be those limitations on scale so as not to take over the agricultural operation or to create nuisances or impacts on neighboring farm uses. So they wouldn't require an official plan amendment if they're small scale, but they would still require a zoning amendment at the municipal level. So we'll go on to the next slide here. So with that, staff do believe that the proposed changes through official plan amendment number 23 have regard for matters of provincial interest under the Planning Act. They are consistent with the provincial planning statement 2024. They continue to conform to the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and they align with the overall goals and objectives of the county official plan as expressed first by council in 2017-18, leading up to the approval of that 2019 plan, and has continued to be communicated by council through your actions and decisions going forward. As I noted, a further consistency exercise with PPS 2024 is likely due following that growth management strategy update. With that, we'll go on to the next slide, and the warden read out the recommendation at the beginning, but essentially it's to receive the report, to acknowledge the wonderful written and oral submissions that were received, and to direct staff, if appropriate, to prepare the bylaw for county council's consideration in a few weeks' time. That's all I have at the stage, but be certainly happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you. So I'll look around the room first for questions. Okay, so we're going to begin with Councillor McQueen and then to Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and just thank you for the report, Scott. Just a couple things, and I know it was raised before with regards to different types of development in the rural lands. Now, one thing we know is rural lands aren't for intensive farming. Intensive farming has to be on ag lands. And there is rural lands that aren't farmland or marginal, rural lands are could be anything but a farm. We just had a town hall meeting a week ago, and we have 4 arenas. We have 7 community centers in our municipality of Great Highlands. And it was suggested that one was repurposed for some other reason, would they drive that far to go to the other arena? And they said, no, we like to come to our community hub, which is the arena, the community center. They don't want to drive, they don't. So this, and I understand where you would push the more development toward the urban centers and stuff like that, understandably. But there's certain parts of community living, it's about community and rural living that, it does include farming and all that stuff, but there's a bit of it's an interesting thing around rural Ontario and rural lands where you can have, we call it communities within our community of communities. And that, again, those arenas and community centers become that hub, whether it's for an agricultural fair or all that stuff. And I don't need to say any more of that, but there is this attachment to your community of your area. And sometimes the feeling of expanding that, or from a housing perspective, they don't want to go here. They want to stay here. And that's what I'm just trying to say, in the sense of it's a different, and maybe you wouldn't experience, not everybody would experience unless you lived it or heard about it. But I just know at our town hall, it was suggested that could one of our 4 arenas, and again, our 4 arenas came from 4 municipalities that merged into Great Highlands, but there's still community hubs of those certain areas that people attract to. And again, community hubs was something that was communicated a few years back, even from the provincial government. So I'm not debating anything. I'm just saying that there is a little bit of a different community feel when they live in the rural part of Great Highlands and Great County. And they just don't want to go to an urban setting or that type of thing. They feel attached to that area. And it's getting harder and harder. And it also comes back to the point about supporting our arenas and supporting our community centers and the local churches and the schools. Like it's about population as well, and maintaining that population. So it's just sort of, I'll leave it at that. Agriminimums, I'm glad you're still sort of saying that could be a possibility. And I guess the other thing, Scott, is if a proposal comes forward, there can be an amendment to the plan as well, but can come forward and that sort of thing. So I'll leave it at that, but there is just a little bit different flavor in the rural part on the rural lands.
So Director Taylor, did you want to address the pattern of hamlets, the settlement areas, in terms of the hamlets that would be across our communities? Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Madam Warden, and thank you for your comments, Councillor McQueen. And the one thing, maybe I misspoke a little bit, but when I speak to directing development towards our settlement areas, we're directing development towards all of our settlement areas. So certainly we have those, if you like, higher order settlement areas where you have full municipal water and sewer services. But we also have what the county official plan designates as our secondary settlement areas. And the one thing I'll say is that we've seen a real resurgence in recent years in interest in developing in those secondary settlement areas. And so, Councillor McQueen, I know you raised this comment, but just to single out Grey Highlands here, currently we have subdivision applications underway in Feversham, in Eugenia, in Rockland, and in Maxwell. And so when I look at those communities, I think you're bang on. Those are community hubs. And in some cases, individuals may identify with those communities more than they would Grey Highlands or Grey County. That's their world, so to speak. And so we want to do everything we can to strengthen those areas. We certainly don't want to forget about our rural or agricultural areas. We want to make sure that people can still live and work and earn a living in those areas. But for the larger scale residential developments, that's where we think there's still merit in directing them to the secondary settlement areas, the primary settlement areas, some of our escarpment recreational designations in that regard, because we do see more services and amenities. And then with respect to your comments on agriculture, no doubt there's a wide variety of land capabilities across the county. Some of our rural areas are still very productive agricultural lands. We have class 1, 2, and 3 soils there. But you're right, there are some lands that are very rocky, or in some cases wet, or other conditions, or steep, that wouldn't be the best for agriculture. In some cases, those might be great for aggregates or other types of resource use or forestry. But again, it's supporting those broad spectrum of uses, from the resource uses to the recreational and the residential in that regard.
Okay, thank you. We better move on. So I'm going to go to Councillor Nielsen next.
Thank you very much, Warden Matrosov. And just a quick one, and similar to, I guess, the train of thought Councillor McQueen had. I'm just wondering if, Scott, you can help me understand planning perspective. So good planning policies versus understanding the customer base. So when you're giving your report and suggesting that like a mobile park home would be subdivision would be great in our settlement areas, I did laugh to myself thinking of where would I fit that in the scope of Hanover, and how would that play out, and it probably wouldn't fit. But then your comment about secondary settlement areas does work. I'm just wondering if, when we consider planning options and planning policies in theory, about the fact that it is logical to drive settlement growth towards the settlement areas, how do we take into account the types of individuals we're trying to attract, and the difference in mentalities, be it somebody who wants to live in a urban setting versus somebody who wants to live in a rural setting versus someone who wants to live in that maybe more even rural or more country setting?
Through you, Madam Warden. Thank you for your question, Councillor Nielsen. Try to keep this brief. This could be a very long answer, and maybe it's an offline discussion. We do try to take into account the needs of all of our community and all of our visitors. And we talk about this quite often with respect to housing, housing for all. As much as we talk about affordable housing, we still need those larger homes for larger families, or larger homes for those with more affluence in our community. And not to say that one is better or worse than the other, but we need the broad spectrum. And so when we look at any planning policies, one of the first ways of sort of ground truthing those policies is the feedback we get from residents, from visitors, and from developers. And further to some of the questions and comments we have heard this morning with respect to the future ready development metrics, staff can dream up whatever they wish in the office, but if you've got builders and people with lived on the ground experience saying there's no way I could ever build that, then there's really no point in putting those into policy or into supporting documents in that regard. And so what it does mean is, as we work through these official plan policies, there are changes over time. And back to Councillor McQueen's comments, there can be amendments to the plan as well. So we do our best to present a balanced perspective, a perspective that will support residents and future users throughout the county and throughout our communities. One of the other things we also think very heavily about is the different stages of life. So where you are when you might be looking at your first starter home or a family home versus those units that might be needed, or the land use supports that might be needed when you're looking to downsize. Those are all things that go into it. And what we've heard over the years is some of those rural homes and rural uses are fantastic for folks that have the mobility and have the affluence to own their own vehicles and everything else. But they're not as great for our older adults or people without access to a personal automobile. So again, there's that balance of allowing people that lifestyle choice. No doubt lots of people choose to move to Gray because of its beautiful landscape and supply of homes in the rural area. But we also need to think about the longer term health of those settlement areas in terms of the hamlets and the primary.
Okay, thank you. And with my mantra has always been housing for all ages and stages of life. That also includes transition. So residents can remain in a community and then downsize or change their housing according to their needs as they age in that community. Age up and age down. Okay, so with that, then we'll look for more comments. Looking around the room, looking virtually. Okay, Director Taylor, I don't see any further hands up for you, so thank you again for illuminating those extra details for us to consider. It has been moved and seconded, so at this point in time, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much, Director Taylor. And next, we will move on to item 7D, which is, I'll read out the recommended motion. We'll get it on the floor, and then I'll invite Director Hoy to address comments. It's recommended that the Urban Road and Roads Exchange Task Force minutes of March 20th, 2025 be adopted as presented, and the following resolution contained therein be endorsed. Number 1 is that report TRUR 0625 be received, and that the funding model presented for the urban road and rural road transfers be approved, and that a levy increase of $1,240,901 be to support the funding model for the road transfers be included in the 2026 draft budget for council's consideration, and that staff be directed to negotiate new road agreements with the affected municipalities in accordance with the activities in the report, and that the corresponding draft agreements come forward for consideration. May I ask for a mover? Moved by Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Hutchinson, number 2. And of course, you're from the same municipality too. I can't even use that to identify. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. It's on the floor for discussion. And with that, we're going to begin. I believe before we go to questions, we're going to allow Director Hoy, and then I will go to questions, seeing that Councillor Nielsen has raised his hand.
Yeah, I'll go through the presentation that we had presented. There's a couple slides we've added, just some summaries of what was talked about at the task force. So I'll go through this. I'll start with the urban exchange, and then go into the rural after. So this was the background of the urban, recommending the transfer of road sections of the primary and secondary settlements, about 50 kilometers. And it's really come out of the difficulties in dealing with multiple ownership of the urban roads. So you'll see the last line there, the disproportionate amount of time we spend owning, being partners, owning the same asset. I think everyone's heart is in the right place. Everyone's doing their best efforts, but it is quite difficult to be in an urban that has maybe different priorities than the county does. And we own the storm sewer and the road, and then the water main, sanitary, sidewalks, et cetera, owned by the lower tier. So it really does create a lot of issues. And you'll see them here on the next page. And this was kind of the thought behind this. So just increasing efficiencies, these are some of the issues that come up. Even if you wanted to have a parade or anything in the town, some municipality services, that sort of thing, you always have to get a permit. Just utilities, entrance permits. People get very confused when they live in Owen Sound and they have to get a county entrance permit. They're never very happy about it, obviously. Just pedestrians, pedestrians are typically with the municipality, but it's a county road, so there's always that kind of confusion. Just things like sidewalk maintenance, people have phoned the county thinking it's our thing. It isn't, it's the municipality. So just, these are all those little kind of wrinkles that keep coming up and being in the urbans. So here was just some of our benefits of local management. People only have one person to call. A lot of times the community has a lot of very specific concerns about building the community. They might even go through fundraising, and then next thing you know, they make a presentation to the local council who is completely supportive, and then it turns out, oh, we got to ask the county, and it's against their policy. So just kind of us getting out of your business really was kind of the thinking behind a lot of these. Here's the list of the urban roads to be proposed to be transferred. As you can see, there's quite a few of them, and they're across many municipalities. So all the primaries and a few of the secondaries would be going back to the municipalities. So in the municipal, we met with every municipality a few times we have. And I think the important thing on this slide is probably just that second point kind of overwhelming, opinion of the ones that only had an urban, download, or they were just receiving an urban road and maybe weren't transferring a rural road. It just didn't feel like there was enough of a financial compensation package for them. That was pretty much unanimous that, and not just even just financial, it's a big bunch of new tasks, right? So in some cases, such as Hanover, the roads that we're proposing to download are the busiest ones in town, and they don't really have any other road that compares to how busy, Gray Road 10 and Gray Road 4 are. So there is obviously some concern, you don't want to get stuck with a bunch of work that you weren't expecting or that you can't handle, and that all reflects back in level of service or a higher level of service than other roads they have. So that was pretty much across the board for the urbans, that nobody wants to get stuck with a kind of a problem in the future. So I think that we've been very clear on that from the start. That this wasn't, your typical MTO download, you're taking it and good luck, talk to you in 5 years. This is something we want to work on together to come up with a solution that we can all be happy with. So the big change we did make was for the municipalities with urbans only. Originally, the funding was tapering off towards the 5 years out, just to get used to maybe when there was no county funding, because right now it's kind of a 10-year window. So with the urbans, we just left that funding to continue to grow based on getting the same percentage as our capital plan would get here at the county, what our levy would grow for our assets. So that's basically, and again, every year, in this is future council funding decisions anyway. So regardless of what we say here, this is kind of our blueprint. This is how we'd be proceeding. But every budget is, can be its own beast when the times come, depending on what's going on in the world, of course, and other departments. So our next steps of the urban transfers, we would be probably obviously doing the rurals and the urban many meetings with the municipalities just to figure out what the agreement would look like, and working out some maintenance support. You'll see it in the staff report. There's a list of basically everybody needs help with plowing in the winter, with the exception of Owen Sound, who does our plowing for us. So everybody else feels like for now, because you're not going to go out and buy a new truck and have two guys with, whenever the transfer happens. So we'd still be doing quite a few maintenance activities. But there did seem to be general consensus that the summer maintenance is where the county really, to drive into Owen Sound from Chatsworth to do some animal removal is sort of a waste of time, right? It's not a question of necessarily manpower. It's just, it's some of the time that the summer maintenance is not near what the winter maintenance is. So everyone kind of agreed that maybe the summer, we'd probably be, everyone would be fine on their own, but the winter is where the big problem is. And especially if it's a winter like this winter. So, and you'll see the transfer target date for the spring of 26 we have in here. So there's a lot of work to do between if this gets approved and the actual transfer, but we've kind of been zeroing in that spring is kind of a good date to do any transfers, urban or rural, as far as that goes, because it's just a bit of a let off till the winter comes. You don't want to do it the year end January 1st, and December 31st, one guy's plowing it, and January 1st, some other guy. It just creates a lot of problems. So that's kind of the date we're trying to narrow in on. So I guess I'll just go on to the rural before we get any questions here. So this is about the rural roads. So basically the road responsibility, this kind of came from the master plan and from the official plan. So these roads that the task force evaluated, they're not really new. They've been in previous road needs studies. And I think if anything, maybe some of them have really come to the forefront that you can see why they were in the old roads needs. So they, like I said, they support growth, go to our official plan. That point 2 there, the changing traffic patterns. Everyone goes where the machine tells them to go now. So they don't necessarily care if it's a county road. There's a lot of county roads that maybe are a lower level of service than some of these roads that we're going to be maybe taking. So it's just having the right level of service for the right road. All of a sudden, you've got all these cars going on some township road that really can't handle it is not ideal for the traveling public. So, and just the third point, a lot of these roads came out of our talks with commercial carriers and agriculture You know, they have a direct route they want to get there too, right? Which maybe the existing road network doesn't necessarily facilitate that. So here are the rural roads in question. It's narrowed down, the task force narrowed down to the 4. Again, we've left there's dates in the report, but we're just not sure the exchange date. Again, hoping for maybe spring 26. And just at the top of the page there's these kind of 3 projects that were kind of caught in the kind of in the transition period where, you know, we felt we've already started some things with them. We just kind of didn't want to slam the door, you know, in someone before we do the handover. So there is some jobs that we'd probably carry out. In some cases, you know, Southgate's already paved the road we're taking. We would pave another lift, but it's in much better shape than the road we'd be giving them. So generally, we didn't go by the 10-year plan only because, again, it's just a matter of timing. Some people have a lot of jobs in the 10-year plan, some people don't. So we went more with a percentage of our capital and what people own. And again, rural transfers, same thing. We'd be discussing agreements on how the transfer would work, who would be responsible for what. And again, no public information sessions yet. So some of these roads that are becoming county roads or becoming lower tier roads, we haven't necessarily heard from the public what people think. You know, some people appreciate or would appreciate the increased level of service. Other ones maybe don't want to live on a county road because they're afraid it'll get busier. So we haven't really got a lot of feedback from the public yet on that. And at the discussion that task force, here are some of the things that were discussed in quite a bit of detail. Just improving service levels and efficiency. So getting rid of, you know, the multiple ownerships of the urban and maybe having the road at the appropriate level should increase efficiency. And then we'd have a lot of work to do, as I said, on transition plans, timing, the funding, maintenance with each municipality. So as proposed in the motion here, it would be a $1.24 million levy increase, which equates to 1.56 of the corporate levy that would be adopted, or at least considered, I guess, as a term in the 26 budget. So the task force has supported the funding model and instructed staff to present the agreements to member municipalities with draft agreements to be presented when finalized. So you know, the agreement, there is going to be specific things in the agreement, but I think the funding model is how we're going to move forward. You know, if someone decided that they wanted to do it and still receive all the funding they received, I don't know if that's up for this committee to decide, but we were going to progress under kind of the format as directed here. And there's the motion. And again, we're just looking to have a decision on moving forward. Because our original intention, of course, one of the many was to stay out of the election cycle, and we're kind of falling behind on that a bit, maybe. So we're really hoping to keep this thing moving at first.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Hoy. So we're going to begin with Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Metrosoff. And when this came forward before, I had questions and concerns over the concession 12 upload and how that would affect the capital project and the costing. And I was asking questions about, you know, we're offering money down to lower tier municipalities, and then was there some similar reciprocal question coming from the lower tiers in what's being brought back up to the county? I look at this urban road exchange selfishly from the county perspective, which is, in my eyes, the goal would be to realign our 10-year capital plan and our asset management plan to be sustainable and deliverable from a county perspective. The one road that just seems to, when I review the committee meeting minutes and the committee meeting topics, that seems to really sway whether or not this is a financial benefit to the county itself, seems to be that concession 12. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, I can't support the way it's written right now because of the costing and that capital expense and long-term asset management plan for the county, when the majority of what's being presented makes sense and is logical. The urban road exchange, I find the premises that you've brought forward as to the benefits, and there are some, obviously the long-term costs and stuff to the lower tiers, but from the county perspective, there's a benefit to getting out of the way within the urban centers. And so my instinct is to have that question be specifically, does this committee, does council as a whole support that exchange of the concession 12? For myself, the financial cost doesn't justify the benefit that I might present, sorry. So I guess my question to you and what I've asked staff already is, what's the difference in the costing if we brought concession 12 out of this conversation? In my questions for staff earlier today, that seems to be hard to answer on the spot, and I can respect that. So if for brevity's sake, I'll move the motion that I was discussing with the clerk, which is to the motion and the corresponding resolution contained herein be deferred pending further information from staff on the impacts of removing concession 12 and Gray Road 9 from the proposed exchange, so that we can get the information as to what is the cost, including concession 12 in this discussion, and what is the cost not including concession 12 into this discussion.
Okay, thank you. Before there's any discussion on that motion to defer, I'm going to need to see if there's a seconder for that. Looking for a seconder. It's been seconded by Councillor McQueen, so it's now on the floor for discussion. So just, Madam Clerk, did you catch that? Are you able to put that up on the screen? Oh, it's already up on the screen behind me. Excellent. Okay, so this motion is up on the screen for discussion, so there shouldn't be any further discussion on the main motion until this one has been debated and voted on. So we'll go to Councillor Greg.
Thank you, Warden, and through you. I'd just like to note, I moved that motion as committee chair with tremendous apprehension. There was considerable discussion about forwarding that type of a cost increase to budget and finance considerations for 2026. I'm wondering if your amending motion here might be a little too specific by itemizing it to concession 12 and Gray Road 9, whereas as a committee, we might benefit from more extensive information as a whole. So I'm going to think traffic count data, just right off the top of my head. Because if we have all the correct information before us, it might be demonstrated that concession 12 might be the one of the four that might be the best one to move forward with over and above the other three. So we don't have the data right now in front of committee that might allow us to look at all the options to respond to your concern about the total cost increase that we'd be considering here. That's my only concern is, what if you look at that entire map and transportation route data and the means of travel that people are exercising, that's the best one to move forward with, and we're precluding it right now from being further looked at, because traffic count data could demonstrate that's a far better one to move, even with the cost, than the Gray Road 25 project, for instance. So I guess I'll put it back to you if you're concerned with it being that specific.
So the reason for the deferral in my eyes is the financial impact on the county council and county itself. So the motion here is to defer pending more information on these two sections. It doesn't, I guess to yourself, Councillor Greg, it doesn't expand to ask for traffic count data on all the roads, specifically more over the information on what does it look like to have it in and not in. So my deferral here is solely based on the financial. I guess if county doesn't support this deferral for maybe this premise, or you can make an amendment to it to request more information than the financial aspect. When reviewing the documents that the task force received, my stance is more over the financial implications.
Okay, thank you. And we continue to discuss only the amendment that is up on the screen. I'll ask if there are other comments. We'll go. Oh, read the motion. Okay, some of the members can't see that motion because it's not on all the screens, so. Not all the screens are in sync with each other. So, Madam Clerk, could you please read out that motion for us?
So that the motion and corresponding resolution contained therein be deferred pending further information from staff on the impacts of removing concession 12 and Greer Road 9 from the proposed exchange.
Okay, was that good, Councillor Hutchinson? There, and it's now on the screen behind you as well. Thank you. I appreciate that. Did you have a comment then, Councillor Hutchinson? No, okay. We'll go to Councillor McQueen next.
I don't know if this could be an amended motion to the amending motion. Or deferral. Then I guess I can't add to it then. My point is, I guess, and through you, Madam Chair, is I think it's very important that this whole idea does move forward in a public information session to get that feedback. I mean, if this motion was to be supported and get more information, but I really feel that we need, and it's talked about going to the public. And if you have those timelines, I really think that, I don't know how that can be written in this motion or a separate motion, that we do go out to the public. Cause I know that Morgan can do that. You know, like we're going to the public with regards to our planning fees. We're going to a public on other smaller things like the tree cutting bylaw. This is a major thing in the county of Grey and the shifting. I think it would be really in our best interest to move forward with that sooner than later. And I don't know how that can be crafted if this is a deferral that gets more information, but is that a separate motion, Madam Chair? Or like, I don't know, I'm seeking some advice on that because I really think we should be moving on a public process.
Okay, thank you. What I can clarify is that slide 11 does refer to the fact that one of the next steps would be to have the public information sessions. So if there is a deferral to get more information, then that will defer the public information session that's already scheduled. So we do need to keep, because this is a motion to defer, not the main motion. I can't see something being altered on this one. I don't think there's such a thing as a friendly amendment that could be added to a motion to defer. But if this one fails, then it is possible for another motion to defer, or would that be a reconsideration, Madam Clerk? Right. But we already have public information sessions already in the queue. There's no. Okay, we're going to go to the CAO for clarification.
One of the things that we talked about at the last committee meeting was that if this moved forward, it would be very important to work with all of the people who were affected by the changes, right? I think everybody understands that you change the ownership of the roads, then that means people's addresses would change, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of service levels would change. But those information sessions have not been scheduled. That was to be a future thing if it went forward. What I'm hearing from you, Councillor McQueen, is that your preference would be more of like a public information center type session where we were seeking input from the public prior to making a formal decision at this table. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, and it keeps it going. It keeps it going. I mean, we just went out to OPA 23 and we got public comments. This is a big deal in my mind. So my point here, and that's why I wondered, and that's why I was trying to seek some guidance, is could there be an amendment to this motion that says, but a public information session would still continue while you gather this information. That's sort of what I'm saying is maybe this defers for more information, but it carries on a process that allows to get that public feedback. That was sort of where I was coming from. So you don't completely lose everything.
Okay, now I have heard though another concern that's been put forth in the discussion that this particular motion here is too specific about one particular section. So I think to preserve the integrity, I'm looking at that we're going to need to vote on this one the way it is. If it fails, it would be possible. I checked in with the clerk and I don't believe it would be a reconsideration if the deferral were for a different reason, such as moving ahead with the Public Information Center. So I would like to go over to the deputy CEO at this point.
Thank you. And further to this, and just speaking to this motion that's before this committee, I think it would be helpful from a staff perspective to at least know what's being considered or what's being proposed as part of the exchanges, so that we can have some good dialogue and feedback and consultation with the public. So if there's a question mark on any of these road exchanges, the one being highlighted here as part of this motion, I think from a staff perspective, it'd be good to know, is council generally supportive of this being still considered as part of the exchanges before we have those public consultation sessions?
Okay, so deputy CEO, then am I understanding you correctly that you would hope that if there is another motion that's put forth in order to defer long enough to have public information sessions, that you would be seeking guidance for direction for staff, such as naming the fact that it would be that the further information would be on all 4 of the potential uploads, that kind of. Okay, he is nodding and agreeing, correct. Okay, so we still have this one here on the floor that we will need to vote on. So Councillor Body, comment?
Speaking to the motion on the floor, I don't support deferring. Staff have been working on this for 10 years. Am I right? A number of years. We've had a committee working on it. I also don't favor starting to carve out certain roads. I think because the committee's worked on it, staff have worked on it, I support moving ahead, looking at all of it and seeing where we get to, not A, deferring, or B, looking at carving out certain roads at this point. So I won't support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments regarding the motion that we have here on the screen to defer with the reference to that particular piece of land? Okay, Councillor McQueen, you have already spoken on this. So is there one additional point that you wish to raise?
So on the meeting of September 6th, 2024, staff brought forward a recommendation with regards to looking at the three particular roads, and I have to go back to my report, and that was exchange Southgate Side Road 11 for Gray Road 14, exchange Bennett Sullivan Town Line for Gray Road 25, and transfer concession 5 Derby and concession road 6 to Gray County. That was the recommendation. That's it. Then it further said that staff be directed to undertake further consultation and investigation regarding the proposed exchange for West Gray concession 12 for Gray Road 9 due to the cost of reconstruction of concession 12. And then there was, in those minutes, it was on the floor, and then there was amended motion to the main motion that said that the motion be amended to strike out clause 3 and add West Gray concession 12 for Gray Road 9 transfer to clause 2. So in the original report in September 6th, this wasn't on the list. It was added. And staff even had concerns about the cost in the report dated September 6, 2024. So this is not coming out of nowhere. There is issues around the true costs of this addition, and even staff weren't sure. So there is some basis to why this resolution is on the floor today. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLean. Director Hoy, did you wish to address any of that? We have, of course, all of council has reviewed minutes, so we are familiar with that information.
Yeah, just what Councilor McQueen said. Yeah, I remember that meeting quite well, of course, and it wasn't in the original motion because it is, it's the biggest of the transfers. But at that time, the task force, seemed pretty overwhelmingly in response of moving forward with the 4 roads as originally picked out. So it feels like we had that discussion then at the task force. They were supporting of 12. We would leave it out because of the expense, but it has a lot of merit too. So it's a tough decision, obviously, but yeah, that was addressed in the September task force. So we've been working under that premise ever since.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Debreen.
Thank you. And through you, just so that I'm clear, that at any point in time, if this fails, if at any point in time before the 2026 budget, everything is still the costs are still up in the air for approval. Things can change. They can be pulled out, they can be put in, the cost may go up, the public may not be supportive of any of these transfers. And it might be council's decision to, unfortunately, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but the 10 years of planning and talking and staff time and the committee's time has been worthwhile. We haven't even had public engagement yet to find out, is this something that our communities want? So to defer it longer delays the public engagement. To let this amendment fail and go back to the main motion will allow things to continue to go forward, the consultation, and we still have final say when it comes back with agreements. Yeah, it's not working for us. It's too much money. It's not going to work in this year's budget. We'll delay it. So I just want to understand that all of the options are still up for debate. We just need to move forward and get more information. Madam.
Okay, thank you. I'll put that to now. Deputy CEO has his hand up. Director Hoy, did you want me to start with? Okay. Deputy CEO.
Thank you. And through you, Warden. Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Jabreen's comments in terms of the intent of this particular motion, or the original motion that was supported by task force, was to move forward to those next steps. And from a staff perspective, we obviously didn't want to move forward to those next steps unless there was at least some general agreement from council to proceed to those public consultation sessions, but also start drafting up those agreements and having further discussions with each of the local municipalities of what those agreements will look like. So we were looking for whether this council is generally supportive of what the task force is recommending prior to going to those next steps. Back to this particular motion as before is, again, this being part of one of the exchanges, rural road exchanges, we would like to have, from a staff perspective, that direction from council of whether or not this is one of the roads that's being proposed to be part of the overall mix of exchanges and road transfers. And so again, that will help inform us what are those next steps in terms of what agreements we're drafting, what public consultation will look like, and what information then do we need to bring back to this council as part of those budget considerations for the 2026 budget, based on the direction that's being provided here today.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on this particular one? We'll go over here to alternate Councillor Hutchison.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if I can just give my perspective as being a resident of this area, and speaking maybe behalf of Mr. Eccles, who isn't here today, I'm sure he would have something to say about this issue. I think this, I would like to personally, I would like to see it stay in there, given the amount of time and effort that's gone into this. And my understanding of the goal of the county to have east-west and north-south throughfares. And I think this road in particular is a very important road. Actually was on it last night, going from West Gray all the way over to Mildmay. It's a very well-traveled road, and I think it's one that the county would benefit a lot from having it in there and getting the public input. I think that's the important piece, as we've mentioned over here, that it's going to go to the public, and the public are going to have their say. And I think it's one that's very important. Yes, it's be a benefit for us to not have it in our municipality, but I think for the county's perspective, it would be very, very important for them to have this road. So I would like to see it stay in and get as much information as you can going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go over to Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Matrosoff. Similar to what Deputy CAO Schercher said, the premise here is to decide, is to get a yes or no from this county as a whole, not just the task force, whether or not we support continuing with this project. In my eyes, this one proposes a significant financial cost to the county, and that cost doesn't outweigh, or the benefits don't outweigh that cost. And so this is why I bring it forward, to tell staff to continue to do the work and continue to present it as if this is going to carry through, to have 3, 4, 5 months from now, this project not move forward because of the costing from this particular road, and the balance change that this road brings, to me, is a waste of staff's time. So that's why I'm looking for this question. If this deferral fails, that's fine. Then I do have just a request to bring out this section as a different question to be voted on separately, so that there is firm confirmation whether or not this council is willing to move forward with the costs associated with this road change.
Okay. Any other discussion? Yes, we'll go to Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Could I call the vote, please?
I don't see any further hands that are raised, so I do think we are ready to call the vote on this motion here that's on the screen to defer. So this is only on this motion to defer. So I will ask all those in favor. And those opposed? And that motion fails. Okay, so we're back to the main motion at this point in time. Unless there is another motion in that is not a reconsideration, it may contain a deferral, but it will have to be for a different reason. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I'd like to make a little bit of a wording change, an amendment to the main motion. And this goes back to the comments that Councillor DeBreen has been talking with about. It makes sense. But in the motion currently, it says the funding model presented for the urban road and rural road transfer be approved. I would like to change that to be received in principle, and that a public information session be held, and all the other stuff can stay there because it still talks about the budget and everything else, but it's received in principle. So the concept maybe is received, but it allows that a public information session be held. The public information session isn't in the wording of the motion. And again, it goes back to that part that I think it allows it to move on to that next step. So received in principle, which means this body sort of, okay, it makes sort of sense, but it's not approving it as approved. And the word approved means it's done. So I'd like to make those changes if I can get a seconder for that.
Okay, I'll look, I see Councillor Nielsen is seconding it. So that is now on the floor for discussion. I'm going to get that put up on the screen. And I'll ask the clerks to read it out, please, because I can't see it in front of me.
So the effect of the motion would be that the motion be amended by removing the word approved in the relevant clause and inserting receive in principle, and that public information sessions be held.
Okay, so it's now on the floor for discussion. I'm going to put a question of clarification to Director Hoy and Deputy CAO because there was reference to hosting the public information sessions. We've heard from the CAO. We have to be clear on what it is that we've already intended to do versus what would be different with this particular motion. So may I put that question to staff before I open it for discussion? Deputy CAO?
I think this would provide enough direction, I guess, for staff to be able to identify that at this stage, still the urban road transfers and the 4 rural road exchanges would be part of the roads that we'd be looking for public consultation feedback from. So I think that's sufficient. Yeah, so I have no questions or concerns with respect to that particular matter.
Okay, so it's now on the floor for discussion. We'll go to Councillor Dobreen.
Thank you, Warden Matrosov. And just to seek some clarity, the public information sessions, while I agree are important, and I'm glad to see that we're going to start scheduling those. But part of the presentation was also to start developing those agreements. The resolution says start developing those agreements. Can they be held consecutively, concurrently? So that we're not holding up one for the other. We don't have to have the agreement in place. This is an exploration. Was that the original intent of the information sessions, or were the information sessions planned for once we're close to having an agreement?
Question to staff. We'll go to the deputy CAO.
I think the original plan was always that those would run concurrently. Like we could still work on some of those draft templates of what those agreements would look like. Continue to have some further discussions with each of the municipalities, while at the same time having some of those public information sessions about what is being considered here.
Okay. And we'll go to Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Madam Warden. If you look at the report of March 20th, 2025, it says here that the original significant concern came from those within the rural transfer component, noting that perceived inadequate in the financial benefit being provided compared to those who had won. These municipalities were the Town of Blue Mountains, Hanover, Meaford, Owen Sound, and Grey Highlands. Since that, and we came up with the committee, but if you look at schedule table 1, that increase for the urban part has been increased from 24 million to 30 million. So those conversations probably need to be having with those lower tier municipalities, because I know from the Grey Highlands perspective, the information I got that our staff weren't supporting it. But since then, there's been more money put to the table. So that's still communication that still needs to go back to those particular 5 municipalities that I just read out that did have concerns of the transfer. So it's a work in progress, but that still needs to be carried on. So that's one part of this in principle can be moving forward. But also, I bring that point also on the public information session. And this, we talked about this at the committee level and I think Director Hoy talked about this. There's some that would be in favor of this and some maybe won't be in favor of it. Some want to stay a municipal road. Some may love the idea of going to and vice versa. But there's also the issue around 911 and your address. Because if we change all those roads, there's the issue around your driver's license and your address. And I think that's the important part also through the public information session. So there's a lot of things here. And like I said, we just had comments on the OPA 23 and we're talking about our tree cutting bylaw. This is the big one. We need to get that. It doesn't say it can't continue on with the lower tiers. You have those conversations because as I just read out, the first go around with the staff meeting with our lower tiers, there was a model. The model has changed since Schedule 1. There's more money there. So those can continue on as well. And maybe you get more buy-in there as well. So I just think this, receiving in principle still allows it to keep moving forward. As the deputy CEO says, there's a lot of stuff in here. And I know not everybody's on that committee. Well, I know all the reports are there, but there's a lot of stuff here. And it's a lot of hard work and a lot of stuff that's been going through this. And yes, I understand. Well, there was the Master Transportation Service Plan that came out in 2014. I realized afterward there was one prior to that. That's where it talked about concession 12, which I didn't know about. And then we more recently, where we are today. So yes, it's been in the works, but there's a lot of stuff there. And one might beg the question why it never got done, because there's a lot of stuff here. So.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Body.
I'm sorry, Warden and staff, but I'm just looking at the motion itself, and I'm seeing received in principle, and I'm not sure if we want to receive it in principle or approve it in principle. But then, if we're doing that, we're receiving it in principle, then we've got an and at the end of that second sentence. But then we are approving. Oh no, I see. Wait a minute. I think we're approving the budget and going ahead. So I'm not sure if we can receive it in principle and go ahead with the second part by leaving the original motion in and then receiving in principle before that, if we're not going in two different directions and it isn't consistent.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Body. Actually, the clerk has been doing a little housekeeping in terms of the language to make it a viable motion, so I'll go to the clerk.
Thank you. And my understanding is that Councillor McQueen's motion was to support the funding model in principle. So we, as you were raising your question, we were just adjusting the wording on the screen. So I believe it now would reflect what Councillor McQueen's intent is.
Councillor Body, does that allow for the clarification that you were looking for?
Well, we either receive it or we approve it in principle. I don't think we receive it in principle, I think.
Okay, so to receive something does not necessarily mean that you're agreeing to it. The approval in principle means that you'd be approving it, approving the essence of it, but the final stamp of approval is not yet done. So with that, I'll just ask for clarification from the mover to make sure that we're all clear what it is that we will be voting on.
So through you, Madam Warden, in my years of being around the table, receive in principle means you do receive it in principle, that you're supporting it in principle. Maybe I need to Google that word, but just to receive it doesn't mean it just, you're just receiving it, and it doesn't mean it. Receiving it in principle, you're okay with it, but the public information session, the part about the budget, it's still, it's for the budget, but it, as Councillor Green said, it still has to go through a budget process, but it still allows it to move forward. Receive, just to receive it doesn't allow it to move forward. Receiving it in principle, I think, allows it to keep moving forward.
Okay, that. Okay, if I may speak, please, Councillor McLean. To receive does not mean that you're approving. It means that you've heard it, you've read the report, you've received the information. What you are trying to identify is the in principle to about the funding model. So you can support in principle and you can approve in principle. But to receive is not to actually put a stamp on whether or not you agree with everything. It just says that you've acknowledged that it's come before you at the council table. So I think your in principle concept does belong correctly in this, in the second session of what you are trying to say. But it does still say receive in principle, and that's to receive something is just to absorb the information. It's not to say, yes, let's go ahead with that information. But support in principle, perhaps that's the term you're looking for. I
didn't realize that next sentence in there captured what I was trying to say was we approve and we receive in principle. Approve in principle, then that just goes back to your approving it again.
No, as chair, I'm going to say that when you put the in principle in, it says that you acknowledge what it is there, but you're not giving your final approval because you want something else to happen before you make that final approval. Okay, so Madam Clerk, I think it's going to be important that this gets read again. Again, I can't see it, so I'm going to ask for it to be read out so that we're very clear on what it is.
We're still on the amendment, so that the motion be amended to remove the words. Sorry, just one moment. I have to catch up on my notes here. So that the motion be amended to insert the words in principle into the second clause of the motion regarding the funding model. And then insert the that the public information sessions proceed.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. That does help us with highlighting the actual changes layered over top of the main motion. So we're still discussing the two items that are highlighted there. Any further discussion on that? Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands go up, so I'll call the vote on that particular amendment to the main motion. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? Okay, so that motion carries. So we are now going to adjust the main motion. Okay, so what you see now on the screen is now what we will be considering to vote in its entirety, the way that it has been approved as it has been amended. So with that, we'll look for further discussion on the main motion. Councillor Greg.
Just a few things, and through you, Warden. It was asked at the committee meeting, what is the forecasted increase in the tax levy for 2026? The response, I think, was 6.5 or 6.6% at this time. So that definitely justifies the concern about a 1.56% increase for just this one initiative on its own. I won't comment about where that 6.5 will land. It was asked as a result of the download of urban roads and abdicating our responsibility for managing that. Can we corporately demonstrate that there will be any reduction in terms of jobs or roles here because there'll be more work picked up by the lower tier municipalities? At this time, it would appear that that's not the case, that we cannot demonstrate that there'll be a reduction in staffing needs at this level. And the last question, I guess, is from staff, what type of work then, with any changes here and information sessions, if council was to direct that, hey, the budget increase can be no more than 3%, and I'm just making that up, and the funding for this gets halved or the funding for this gets withdrawn completely, how staff can respond to that in terms of the draft agreements that were going out to lower tier municipalities. Yes, right at the very first meeting, the timeline was pre-election cycle. We want to keep it away from the election, from it being an election item. But as Director Hoy noted, it's advancing right into kind of an election cycle. And the time consideration is probably not the same as what it was when we started this. So those are my comments.
Okay, now I do have Director Spicer ready to speak in terms of that. I do need us to keep the context of the discussion just with what we have here. It's fruitful to consider that any decision down the road with the last point that's on this particular motion says that when we come to budget time, our draft budget, that's when we would be looking at this particular figure. So I appreciate the context of the budget, but for matters of today and what we're voting on whether or not we want to have that 1.2 etc. million dollars go through into consideration for the draft. So that's the only decision, not whether or not we are firmly saying that needs to be in the 2026 budget. That's not what we're voting on. We're voting on whether or not it should be considered in the greater context of the budget of the draft budget of 2026. With that, let me go to Director Spicer.
Thank you, Madam Warden. When we prepared the 2025 budget, well, this is the first year that we showed a 2026 projected budget. And in that budget, we showed that we would need a 4.97% increase based on what was determined to be the needs of the departments at the time the budget was prepared. That assumed a $1 million growth. And as a reminder, for 2024, that was just over $2 million. We have no idea what the growth is currently. It's too early in the year to project, as well as to understand the implications of what's going on with tariffs and inflation. So there's a number of assumptions that are made in that 2026 projected budget that'll be continued to refined over the year. That 4.97 also doesn't reflect any tax ratio adjustments with Owen Sound and the multi-res. When you layer on the 1.56 levy increase resulting from the $1,240,901, the way it currently shakes out, that would be a 6.53% increase if everything held true as to what was in the proposed budget.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. We'll go to the deputy CAO.
Just further to the comments and questions from Councillor Gregg with respect to staff changes, and as noted through the report as well as the presentation that Pat indicated, we think majority of the municipalities, based on our previous discussions, would require the counties to continue to maintain those roads, especially during the winter. So we think from a staff perspective, there likely will be zero changes on with respect to that. In fact, we may need to look at what that looks like overall based on some other changes from an overall just growth perspective. As it relates to the roads agreements, obviously our intent is to work with each of the municipalities to work through those details. And we've had some great conversations already with each of the local municipalities. Right from the get-go, we've indicated that we don't want to leave any municipality with, not being able to continue to maintain these roads. And so that's where, as Councillor McQueen indicated, the urban, based on the comments and feedback we heard from municipalities, staff recommended changes to the urban transition model and increase those funding where the municipalities where there was no rural road transfers to increase the rural road transfer or the urban transition fund rate. And keeping it consistent for the 10-year period. So we haven't presented that yet to the municipal staff or to the municipalities. We just presented that to the task force last week. We wanted to get general support from this council before we have some of those further conversations, but that will be part of those discussions. And we hope that that will resolve some of the concerns, at least that we've heard. And we know there's some further details that we need to work out. And we're committed to doing so if this motion were to pass by council today.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions or comments on this main motion? Councillor McQueen.
Just going to read you a little article in the paper. Grey County will be hosting an open house for a public showing different options for upgrading a county road 31 between Rob Roy and the county line to correct safety concerns and make it easier to maintain. That was written 30 years ago. So it's something that we had in the practice of going to the public.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, there are no further comments. Then we'll call the question. All those in favor? Oh. Okay, there's been a request for a recorded vote. Madam Clerk.
Councillor McKay. Councillor McKay is in favor. Councillor Carlton. Councillor Carlton is in favor. Councillor Pringle. Councillor Pringle is in favor. Councillor McQueen. Councillor McQueen in favor. Councillor Nielsen. Councillor Nielsen is opposed. Councillor Patterson is in favor. Councillor Dickert in favor. Councillor Kentner in favor. Councillor Keaveney. Councillor Keaveney in favor. Councillor Body in favor. Councillor Gregg in favor. Councillor Milne had to leave the meeting earlier. Councillor Dobreen is in favor. Warden Matrosovs in favor. Councillor Bourdignon
In favor.
in favor. Alternate Doug Hutchinson is in favor, and Councillor Hutchinson is in favor. That motion or resolution carries 83-5.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you both staff, or all staff members that contributed to the extra information on that. Okay, so that concludes our section 7. So that allows us to move back over to 6A, which was pulled from the consent agenda, and it's recommended that the resolution of the municipality of Grey Highlands regarding affordable housing and home share programs be received for information. May I ask for a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor? Thank you. Moved by Counselor Nielsen, seconded by Counselor Pringle. And Counselor Nielsen, you were the one that requested to pull it, so I'll look to you first.
Thank you very much, Ward Machtoff. My apologies to everybody because I know we're already running late. Our Grey Highlands Senior Advisory Committee made this request. I just wanted to let this committee know. I had a brief discussion with Director Shaw, Mary Shaw, regarding this model, and she did discuss with me that the county has watched some of the home share models that exist around, not just the Georgian Bay one. They do present some challenges regarding risk and liability as the organizer, and that it would be difficult for the county to implement such a program. So I just wanted to let this body know that I'll bring that information back to Grey Highlands and to just receive this information. Thanks very much, Warden.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Okay, in that case then, all in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. Oh. Counselor Pringle seconded. Counselor Nielsen had moved. Okay, so that motion passes. Next, we'll go to item 8, which is our closed session matters. And it's recommended that the committee of the whole does now go into closed session pursuant to section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land in a municipality, 2 items being a land disposition and land acquisitions for road widening purposes. May I ask for a mover? Thank you. Moved by Counselor McKay, seconded by Counselor Hutchison, original. And all those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. We'll give a moment for technology and those individuals to exit the chamber. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have risen out of closed session, and I can confirm that we only discussed the 2 items that were listed as we went into closed session. And with that, then we will now put a call out for other business. Any other business? See no hands. We'll proceed on to notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion to serve? Not seen any hands go up. In that case, then we'll entertain a motion. Oh, notice of motion, Counselor Nielsen. Oh, okay. We have a motion to adjourn from Counselor Nielsen, a seconder. Oh, there, we were slow on the second. Okay, thank you. We've got Counselor Tom Hutchinson is seconding. All in favor? Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.